This week, we welcome back Michael Roytman from Kenna Security for a discussion on XDR and vitamins. How do we know the security protections we're investing in are working? Next up, Dan DeCloss from PlexTrac returns to join us for a technical segment on how tall do you have to be to ride the ride. In the security news, why privacy is like bubble wrap. South African government releases its own browser just to re-enable Flash support. Former LulzSec hacker releases a VPN not 0 day used to hack hacking team. How a researcher broke into Microsoft VS Code GitHub, and how criminals used a deceased employee's account to wreak havoc. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. PlexTrac is the platform that helps cybersecurity practitioners get the daily work done. Red teams can create reports in half the time and track risk to resolution with the blue team. Teams can centralize remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits. Effectively communicate risk in real time through simple visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and robust analytics. PlexTrac is perfect for collaboration across all teams. Visit securityweekly.com/PlexTrac to claim your free month. Want to be more thorough while also working faster? It doesn't matter if you're on the red or blue team, an augmented reality overlay can enable you to be more thorough and faster at the same time. No glasses, no goggles. Polarity delivers this superpower as an overlay on top of your existing workflow and tools. The free Community Edition connects to the data you care about to overlay the context you need to make informed decisions. Apply for early access today at securityweekly.com/polarity.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who has the long hold on the Kickstarter campaign for Baldo, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 681, recorded on January 28th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, the fabulous, the illustrious Mr. Larry Pesce.
Did you say Ball Security Weekly?
I said Paul's Security Weekly? I did. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, either way. Yeah, I whatever. Either way.
Hey, it's good to have you here in studio.
Yeah.
Nice to be around other human beings.
Somewhat
Socially.
Close enough.
Probably should be more socially distanced. That's really difficult for Larry and I.
I know.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Happy Data Privacy Day, everyone.
It is Data Privacy Day. You know that you can make any day like a day. There's like a whole website and
it's Blueberry Pancake Day today.
Is it like a consortium? Like what is it? What is it? Is there laws? There's not.
I think it's like buying a star. Somebody just
threw everybody at the
created a database, and you pay $20 and you got a day.
I gotcha. We
but isn't there only 365 of those days? That seems like a really bad business decision.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome. You can overload the days, Tyler. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't just have to be Blueberry Pancakes Day. It can be also Quack Like a Duck Day and
Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yes.
Seems an awful lot like everybody gets the trophy kind of thing. So I don't know. It's losing its speciality.
Everyone can have a day. Every day is your day.
Today is my day.
Today is your day. There's no Joff, no Lee.
Wow.
Wait, wow.
Nope, that's it.
Wow. It's
weird.
It is. It's weird. Anyway, announcements. Hey, next Thursday, February 4th, 11 a.m. Why do I say p.m.? 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Our first technical training to learn how to manage insider risks in the work from anywhere world. You can register at securityweekly.com/webcasts. Of course, if you missed any of our previous webcasts, you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. This segment is sponsored by Kenna Security. You can visit securityweekly.com/Kenna Security to learn more. Joining us today, of course, is Kenna's chief data scientist, Michael Roytman. Joining us once again to talk about XDR and vitamins. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you.
We loved you so much. We had to have you back.
Vitamins?
Well, it's Paul's Security Weekcast best episode of Podcast Day.
There you go.
I just registered it online.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
I have to look back on my notes and figure out how we got to a point of relating XDR to vitamins. Oh, yeah, it's coming back to me now.
I think it was Joe Rogan's podcast, the thing that relates all things to each other.
Yes. It is, Joe's show is amazing just for that. Just the breadth of topics they cover on that show is really amazing. We'll try and stick to mostly security-related topics with an occasional diversion into vitamins, I guess, on this segment. But we started off, and believe it or not, Michael and I, we're completely sober, I believe, when we had the conversation to figure out what we're going to talk about. And if you believe that, I'll tell you another one. But we started off by saying we were going to try and define what XDR means. What is XDR? Because we've got EDR. What's the other DR? There's regular disaster recovery, right? There's endpoint detection and response. And then all of a sudden there was this XDR. And I'm like, what does that mean? Is that like xylophone data recovery? What does it mean? What is XDR? Let's start
There
there.
used to be a DDR.
Dance
That
Dance
was East
Revolution?
Germany.
Oh,
It's a great game. Oh, the Democratic Republic. I was born there.
Deutsche Democratic Republic, East Germany.
I was born on a Soviet base in Potsdam.
Oh, wow.
And here I was trying to tell people we're going to stick to security. And now
Yeah.
we know that's not going to happen.
Well, this
Wait a
isn't
minute.
exactly
I
vitamins.
need to
either.
go. I need to go get my tinfoil hat a minute. Go ahead.
XDR.
So I Googled right before joining this because I was like, oh, we got to talk about that. Let's figure out what XDR actually is. I did not get a good answer, but I did get to Cisco's website where they have EDR and XDR next to each other.
If you scroll down a little past the sponsored ads, you might do better.
Oh,
Whoever can afford the most money in Google advertising gets to define the term. Is that what we're saying? Because that's
I think that's true for all terms.
Yeah, it's true.
That's just how terms work nowadays. But once you read it, you still don't know what XDR is. It just tells you it's better than EDR, and there's more stuff included.
because it's
Well,
extra.
I mean, yeah,
It's
I mean,
extra.
already I want it. Whatever it is, I want it.
So it's
I
like
mean-
machine learning and AI combined with EDR and everything else. It's got to have some acronyms.
So here's
in
the
there,
question: what are you buying? Are you buying vitamins or are you buying X vitamins? Which ones are better? Obviously, the X vitamins.
I'm going with X vitamins for $200.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
I'd even pay more.
Right?
It's like regular men versus X-Men. Like clearly the X-Men are better.
Clearly, the X-Men are better. So clearly,
Although there does seem to be some debate whether the X-Men are better or not in the actual show. That's like the central point of debate there.
Of course.
we could do a whole hour-long topic on that. That alone. Coming up next week. So we still don't know what XDR is.
Well,
All right, we're still
I got,
early
I
in
got
the
some
segment.
idea.
It's okay.
You have your antivirus, which is like stuff when I was a small child. Then you've got EDR, which is the evolution of that. So you've got a couple more sensors, you got agents, you got malware detection capability. I think that's the transition from we block stuff to we can actually detect malware in your box. XDR, I think, is all of that. More agents, more sensors. There's a lot more tools nowadays. A lot more stuff is cloud-based, but threat information piped in from the cloud into your EDR platform. I think that's the fundamental breakpoint for me.
Do I get it through a single pane of glass though? Because that's really, I hear vendors talking about that, and I really want my single pane of glass.
Larry, reach over and smack him.
So
No, but seriously though, are they leveraging like some of the more advanced like machine learning for like a lack of a better term, where they're numerically trying to represent binaries or malware and then classify those at a threshold for a detection capability? Like, is that what like the next iteration of EDR is?
that's my bet. My bet is it's like there's data intelligence. You can now actually get a live stream of updated information onto your agent that's doing the assessment, or your cloud panel that's your pane of glass, double pane, triple pane, whatever. But the real differentiator is that you can process that information in real time based on the context of the machine, which is something that an individual would usually do in the old framework. And that probably comes from some kind of machine learning.
Well, I think I can help here. So when I go to DuckDuckGo and I search for XDR, right?
Oh, nice.
McAfee's the number one result, sponsored result. Interesting. There's also an XDR off-road performance upgrades, but then extended detection and response. Extended.
See, I know Carbon Black was working on something similar to this. One of my buddies, Moo, was doing some work for Microsoft on their ML team, and Carbon Black had something, I think it was called Binary. It was something about binary emulation environment where it was analyzing these using machine learning by giving it like a graphical or numerical weight, and then they were doing things on top of that.
That's like
and so this kind of real time.
But
Elastic had one too, right? Leaf,
yeah,
I think is what it was.
But in all seriousness, though, I think it extends beyond the endpoint, because what I kind of understand is to be is related to somewhat to my enchanted quadrants, as I call them, that in order to detect indicators of compromise, you want to look at 4 basic areas in your organization. One is your endpoint, one is your network, one is logs from all other sources, we typically call that SIM, and one is threat intelligence. And it sounds like that's what a lot of vendors that had maybe some of these pieces, maybe all of these pieces, put it together and called it extended detection and response. But it really represents, in my mind, the 4 areas that I define that you need to look at in order to be successful at detecting indicators of compromise.
Paul, did you invent XDR? Are you the one buying all the Google AdWords?
No, because I'm not the... Because before it was a triad, right? It was endpoint, network, and SIM, and then others added. I'm not the only one to come up with the concept. I won't lay claim to it. I won't lay claim to creating XDR and taking out Google Ads. I definitely did not do that.
But I think we're getting to the first point where I think I actually have something to contribute. I think that's right. I think it's global context from threat intelligence, local context from your machines, all coming into one place. One of those things could be detecting malware on the box. One of those things could be prioritizing the vulnerabilities on that box. One of those things could be, deploying rules in block mode that are going to work because some of that context. But all of that is happening because of an underlying trend, which is customers are demanding that each of these 4 quadrants has an API that can interconnect with every other tool they've bought. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I remember logging into the Dell SecureWorks, it was Dell SecureWorks at that point, WSDL portal and trying to get a PDF out by querying a search parameter string. That was the API of the day. Today, you can get the vulnerability on a box from Carbon Black over the air, right? The world has changed in that regard.
I'm curious how they're aggregating all of this mass amounts of data between disparate telemetry points. Not everybody's on Microsoft, and Microsoft's not sharing their data. Obviously, you have ATP, you've got all the EDR vendors that are aggregating their own data and building their own threat platforms. So these advanced and machine learning algorithms, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the math guy on this side of this, but the accuracy of those is only as good as...
That involves math.
He's a data guy. It does involve a lot of freaking math.
Data science is actually X math, not just math. That's the difference.
There you go.
But all of that
X or
relies
math.
on the quality of your data, right? Or the data sets in which you provide it to learn from. So if they're not aggregating this between all these disparate products, does that mean we're still at the exact same spot because they're doing exactly what they were doing with their own data in the first place?
Yes and no. So no, because bringing in data from the SOC, the detect and response side, and adding data from the VM side, from the config side to the same place allows you to build a model that has an outcome. The outcome is, how do I stop the thing that I've been detecting on the IDS side from happening on this particular box? And there's a model you can build for that. But I do think you're hitting on an important point. We've got these citadels, relevant term to today, we've got these citadels of information that plays well together. Microsoft is a great example. Carbon Black is a great example. CrowdStrike is a great example. Cisco is a great example. McAfee is a great example. All of them have each piece. But actually, I want to know what you guys think. I don't know if customers is my word that I use, if enterprises really are going to pick just one and say, I'm going to buy every product from them because it's better than the sum of its parts when I have them. I think it's best of breed depending on what fits your needs here and there, and then maybe the combination won't be possible anyways.
Yeah,
Well, the ability to integrate and collaborate, right? Like if they don't integrate and there's a best of breed, that's actually a negative factor, and you may end up using a less a product that's not as good because it integrates so. I've seen that quite a bit, where you end up with a great logging system but a horrible EDR, or you end up with a great EDR but then your alerting and SOC
but Tyler,
visibility is different.
From the same vendor or different vendors? Like, do I, in your example,
Almost
like,
always different vendors.
Oh, well, because I was wondering, like, do I go to one vendor that was traditionally a SIM vendor, and I don't want to shame anyone, right? And they've added this capability to do some endpoint stuff, and they've added some capability to do some network stuff, and they're like, my joke about single pane of glass was, I was only half kidding, right? Because they're like, well, we can do all of this for you. But what you were just describing is what I thought was this scenario where, yeah, they still do logging really well. Maybe they do the network pretty well too, but like their endpoint is pretty terrible. But I'm going to go with them because they've got all the pieces that they've integrated together, and I can use it.
I think that's where Microsoft's made their huge leaps and bounds, right? Is like their EDR product, Defender, for lack of, it's kind of come up and had horrible branding, but ATP, ATA, the threat analytics and threat protection, and Defender, and the integration.
It's not horrible branding.
Telemetry.
They're just a lot of branding.
They just keep redoing whatever they're doing, or they integrate new features, right? But I think having that single pane of glass at the cloud, having a Active Directory that is on-prem and in the cloud, having that ATP that looks at Office 365, looks at your endpoints, having Intune that's configuring all these, so that kind of all these products where they're starting to do all these things really well, and they're actually utilizing their telemetry from the last 5 years and redesign. I think that's where they've started to make some huge leaps and bounds in a security standpoint and an adoption standpoint, because people have that single pane of glass. People have a lot of the products that are actually working and they're going to use anyway. And so now that they've got, less to choose from, I think that's where I think some of the security product vendors are starting to feel the pressure that Microsoft's been putting on them.
And I think that pressure is coming from, so there's the tools that are playing nicely together that allow you to have your glass. But on top of that glass is, you said this just a second ago, 5 years of telemetry data that they can use to make each one of those products better. So there's a global repository of data that's useful in integrating those products together that different vendors have uniquely to themselves. So a great SIM will have great SIM data to build models for that, and maybe their other products aren't as great, but they can leverage that advantage. So Microsoft's done a really great job with that. I think that's what XDR is. I think XDR is actually, let's use our data moats telemetry to make the idea of buying every offering from one vendor more palatable, because those things are actually improved by the combination.
It's interesting how enterprises come to the decision whether or not to go with consolidate under one vendor versus going with multiple smaller vendors and integrating them together. I'm curious what everyone's collectively in the panel today on the show sees in the wild. Do you see people leaning more towards going with one big vendor to solve multiple problems because it's already integrated, or do you see companies going after best of breed and integrating those things together themselves? Or is it my guess is it's probably like a mixed bag, right? Depending on what technology we're talking about.
Well, my experience with customers, get your drinks ready, primarily in the PCI world, they tend to invest in what I would just call point solutions. They've got a PCI requirement they got to meet. What's the tool that's going to get them there?
What's the cheapest tool that's going to allow me to meet the requirements?
Well, yes. That's where it's a mix between the cheapest tool or sometimes they go best of breed, or not even best of breed, but the one everybody knows. Nobody gets fired for buying McAfee to do endpoint protection, or
they have XDR now,
antivirus solution. But we'll get back to that. But for the most part, I don't think I ever saw any company, and still haven't seen a company within that realm that is. They might want to try to go with one vendor, but they've already invested in all these different tools. They want to use them.
Yeah.
They're not ready to jettison them. It's funny, when we were at Tenable, I was trying to talk Tenable and promoting what they called Security Center at the time. Now it's just Tenable. I was trying to get them to understand, look, Security Center does a lot of the things that meet the requirements within Requirement 10, which is the logging and monitoring requirement section of PCI. But they're like, oh, we don't want to go there because we don't want to call ourselves a SIM. We don't want to play in that market because, and I'm paraphrasing, Gartner wouldn't put us in the upper right corner of the magic square or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, fine. So you don't have to say that you're a SIM solution. Just say you meet the logging and monitoring requirements. Because everybody goes out and says, oh, well, we got to get a SIM to meet this requirement. And what are the name brand, what are the recognizable SIM providers, and that's what they'd have. The one I had a client that I was able to get them on a call with one time that already was they had Security Center already for doing vulnerability scanning and other things, and they already had an investment in a SIM solution. I said, well, why don't you just talk to them about you can start using Security Center to start doing some of these things.
Jeff, what was that called? What was the component of Security Center that did the logging? I don't remember what it's called. Wow.
Yeah, you had to ask.
I know, because that was bugging me. I can't remember what it's called now, and I'm sure you couldn't find it on their website now because they've.
No, but I probably have it.
It's been a long time since we.
Not that I have anything that I used to have at Tenable.
Not that we kept any documentation from a previous company that we worked at.
Log correlation engine.
Log correlation engine. Yes. LCE. Yes.
LCE.
Whew, thank you. I feel better now. Okay.
And but I was like, okay, so just pitch this one customer, and this was a Fortune 100 enterprise customer. Pitch them on start using this for the extended functionality, or get the LCE portion.
Yeah.
And the next time you're up for license renewal for the product that you have already that you've invested in, and the CISO or whatever, it's his baby, but nobody likes it, and it's never worked and done anything that's been advertised. Common story. You don't have to renew it, and I tried to get them start marketing this thing to look. You can solve multiple problems with one product, not go to one. Not sort of like we're saying, do we go with a customer to do all the things? But any of my customers would have been giddy to think that they could buy one product point solution that could meet multiple requirements in different areas. That, to me, was a compelling pitch or compelling story, but of course I couldn't get them to jump on it.
And do they meet it, or do they meet the requirements well enough? That's always been my question, and it's always kind of fallen short of when I go to large vendor. We mentioned Cisco, and we'd always be buying a bunch of, back in the day, a bunch of network gear and all that stuff, and they'd be like, oh, you're the security guy. We just bought these 26 security companies, and we've got security products. And I'm like, yeah, but all my friends said that none of them work. This is 15, 20 years ago.
Okay, so this is the vitamins part that I wanted to bring up. I'm remembering it.
All right.
An essential component of this is everybody wants to consolidate all these security tools, single pane of glasses. We've been talking about it for my entire life in security. XDR is just the latest push, in my opinion, and it has some credibility behind it because let's consolidate them in a way that is more than the sum of their parts. Build machine learning models on top of them. We now have APIs. We have the cloud. Great. But the reason people don't switch from a tool that they have that does meet the requirements or doesn't, or works as advertised or doesn't, to something that you're telling them you should switch to, and then you have two from me and I can give you something that's 1 + 1 = 3, is that I don't think anybody actually knows whether their security tools are working or not.
But
it's just like taking vitamins.
I feel good that I'm running it, right?
Oh yeah.
That now it's come back to me, Michael. This is what we're talking about.
Pineapple CBD drink. That's what we're talking about.
Pineapple CBD drinks, right? It was. So I was taking magnesium as a supplement for good brain health and to improve focus. But what I found was
So
like,
clearly it didn't
How's
work.
that working for you?
exactly. But this is the point, right? I'm like, is it working? Is it not? I don't know. All I know is like, if I happen to like run out and didn't replenish my supply and I stopped taking it, I felt really depressed. I'm like, what is going on? What the hell is going on? I don't have anything to be depressed. Like, life is pretty good. Like, I got a pretty good, what is going on? And then I did a Google search and I was like, oh, apparently if you stop taking magnesium, makes you super depressed. I'm like, well, that sucks. Got to get off of this stuff. So we were talking about Joe Rogan podcast. And I'm like, well, he's promoting all this stuff. And I'm like, I promote stuff on the show. I'm like, I believe in the stuff that we promote. I'm like, Joe probably does too, because he makes a living at it. So I'm like, I want to try some of the stuff that Joe's promoting. And so I started taking the, what is it, on it, Alpha Brain. So I got off the magnesium. I'm on the Alpha Brain. And Michael's like, is it working? I'm like, I don't know. I feel like it is. Like, I don't know. But like, I feel attached to the brand because I like Joe Rogan podcast. So will you keep taking it? Will you keep with that sim vendor? Because whatever the reason is, you feel good about it. But is it really working for you, and how do you measure it? And that's where we came down to XTR and vitamins. How do we know it's really working? How do we measure the success of the supplements we take? Like, I don't know. I take vitamin D too. Like, I feel like it's working. Like, how do you know?
You should totally try colloidal silver.
What is that?
Colloidal silver.
Oh. What's that supposed to do?
Turns you blue if you take it long enough.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that I might have a need for that in my life.
At least you know if it's working. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's kind of the point.
Right.
The
that's
little light is
where-
flashy,
Right.
right?
That's where testing still comes into play, right? That's where pen testing and purple teaming, that's where
Agreed, Tyler.
the value really is there. Like, and by all means, I usually encourage customers to do bake-offs, and we'll offer discounted rates to do bake-offs, because before you go putting a product in, and we want you to be more secure, we would rather you have a product in there that we could work with that's high quality. So let's make sure you effectively can test that and then pick one that's within inside of your list that you've already come up with. That provides a great avenue and dialogue between the people that have to go against these tools and actually know whether they work or not, and the people that have to purchase and make the decisions around the tools.
But I mean, testing is important, and also because the vitamins may work for me. Maybe I do some testing and realize like they work for me. Does that mean they can work for Larry or Tyler? Same thing with whatever security solution you have. Might be working for you. Tyler came in, tested it, like works pretty good. Put that in another organization with a completely different team. Maybe that doesn't work for them, right? I mean, there's something to be said. Like, I don't like to take a code editing solution away from a developer if they're cranking out code and it works. I'm like, dude, whatever works for you, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you what tool to use because someone else may have a different tool. May work great for them, even though it might be Nano, and I may not agree with that.
Emacs.
If you can crank out code in Emacs and Nano, more power to you. Michael, sorry.
No, I completely agree with you. I think it's the environment that you're deploying a solution on also determines how well it works. I think the thing I want to bring to our attention is that the fact that we have trouble measuring how good a security tool is from the get-go, and I forget the marketing. I mean, let's imagine you had every tool and you had to actually measure it. Not an easy thing to do. This guy, George Akerlof, he's actually Janet Yellen's husband, won the Nobel Prize for this in economics. The lemons market for cars. The reason why new cars are so expensive is because a buyer has no idea whether one car is going to be reliable or good over another one. As soon as you drive it off the lot, it drops in price because now you've driven it, you know something about it. You're learning something about it. So the pen testing as testing, the purple teaming as testing is actually a great call. It tells you you're taking it for a drive. You're learning something about how it actually works in the wild. That might be the only way to tell the difference between these tools. And if consolidation of vendors, getting to this XDR world requires us to switch out some tooling, I think we need better ways to figure out if our vitamins are working first before we move into that space.
Yeah, because the other thing is many of us, if not probably all of us on the show today, have tested products in some capacity. And maybe come to the conclusion that, you know what, it wouldn't matter if I'm running solution A or solution B. I would have gotten enough value out of it to have it serve its purpose, right? I did this with vulnerability management, so vulnerability scanners. And I'm like, yes, there are some nuances between them, but like at the end of the day, they're all of the major ones anyway are discovering enough vulnerabilities that the differences between them in a lot of environments maybe wouldn't make a difference, right? Again, you'd have to do further study and test it in your environment. And also that depends on the user using them and how your processes are different, right? But at the end of the day, maybe it wouldn't matter. You pointed to, Michael, a paper called The Market for Silver Bullets by Ian Grigg. And admittedly, I did not read beyond the abstract, but if you could talk about that paper and how it applies to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, this is a classic on shout out to SIRA, Society Information Risk and Security Metrics mailing lists that people have forumed and email listed all day long about. This is the application of that Lemons Market Nobel Prize to security. And the idea is that security is a lemons market. If you're a buyer, you are attempting to distinguish between products that you have no idea how they're actually going to work once you do buy them. This is why I think pretty uniquely we do pretty long POCs as an industry, and why we don't see as much switching as we would expect. We don't see as much consolidation as you would think we would have. At this point, we just have more and more security vendors entering, and all the pundits, all of us are sitting here talking about the consolidation of the markets, but it's happening pretty slowly. It's happening slower than new ones are entering the landscape. When I think about ways, so IDOS Labs tried to do this, right? Try to objectively measure it. I think there's the Gartners of the world, the Forrester Waves of the world that are trying to evaluate these products. But it's a step removed still. It's the same thing as Consumer Reports telling you go buy this car versus this car. It's very different than you seeing the results of deploying a solution immediately in your environment, knowing that the vitamin's working. And I think...
Go ahead, Michael.
Maybe the hope here. Everybody needs to weigh in on this because my confidence in this statement is like 20%. The hope here is that if the push towards XDR is combine a bunch of tools so that you can build models on them, the one thing I do know about is models. There are great ways to measure the efficacy of a model and whether it's getting better or worse over time. So maybe that XDR world is what's going to allow us to measure the efficacy of using one scanner versus another under the hood when all three other tools stay stable.
And also thrown into that equation is what I found is that, okay, let's say you measure, like I did, vulnerability scanners. And I pointed out differences and similarities. And I was like, in some scenarios, maybe you want to have all three of the major VMs out there. And Michael, you said you see people doing just that. And I'm like, I don't know that that's a good or bad thing. If it's working for them, okay. Like, I'd want to learn a little more about why. I kind of know why, because there is this weird non-overlapping coverage model, right? Where I discovered, and you could probably do the same discovery today, that across the three major players, right? Rapid7, Tenable, and Qualys, that within some degree, and again, you'd have to measure it again. It was a long time ago that I measured it, but any one scanner had overlap with each other, but also a certain percentage of things that they did not cover, that they did cover that the other ones did not. And that was true, like no matter how you built the matrix, right? There was always some stuff that vendor A covered that vendor B didn't, that vendor C didn't, but vendor C covered stuff that the other two didn't. So it worked in like every direction.
The one big problem with that, and I think the problem that we run into is the complexity of the uniqueness of every network. You run into not only the differences and disparities between technologies and what's been implemented and legacy, or how the environment's changed and what applications they have to support with inside their vertical, but you also run into a configuration issue. Well, there's a ton of tools that have capabilities. Most of those capabilities, in order to effectively use them or do them right, that requires tuning, and that requires a lot of fundamental changes of configurations and that are going to be very specific. And
Tyler, that was I should state, I was measuring as best I could the CVEs that were covered, which again has all of its caveats, right? It was a different set of testing that I would do to say, well, how does this stuff actually work in the real world?
But those are known tests, right?
Yeah.
And that works.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's another issue that we run into is malware and viruses and ransomware and just the threat landscape overall has changed, where we have polymorphic viruses. We've got the ability to pack, encrypt, and modify and XOR and do all of these different TTPs that, change and throw off signatures and even minor nuances of behavior. And so it's not as though you can just detect a certain vulnerability within inside of a piece of computer or technology. You have to be able to detect anomalous behavior. You have to be able to detect heuristic behavior, and you have to be able to detect both of those together in combination with normal behavior that a user does versus the same behavior that an attacker might be doing.
Well, I think there's two different problems that we're trying to solve. And I think on one hand, when I talk about my enchanted quadrants for indicators of compromise, that's on the detection, more on the detection front. I want to take in data and I want to analyze it and see if there are any maybe precursors to attacks, active attacks happening, but more so it's historical record, like was there an attack that was happening on any of my systems and or networks? I have different quadrants to measure, which I think really, Michael, this is your space, really that's about prioritization. When I look at the vulnerabilities in my systems, the configuration and the patching levels of my systems, that when you kind of put those two models together, if you will, really helps me maybe prioritize, right? Prioritize my response, but prioritize my operations as to what issues I may address first and where my gaps are.
So I think we actually hit on the answer, but I don't think the industry is there yet. And I'm at fault for this too. I don't think I'm there yet. The way that you figure out whether a tool is more or less effective than another one is you have to have outcome metrics. Mm. And for vulnerability scanning, an outcome metric could be coverage. That's a great metric. Another one could be, I don't know, efficiency at catching exploits or something. You find that metric, and then you swap out the underlying technology to see how that metric has changed for your particular organization. Now, in reality, the computation of those metrics needs to be something pretty automatic, right? This is on the vendor side. Vendors should be providing those kinds of outcome metrics. Maybe they're configurable, maybe they're not. Similarly, when I source threat intelligence, I go out to like Proofpoint, Reversing Labs is a company we work with, Exodus Intelligence. Some of these are OEM relationships where we pay them and then we use that to do the prioritization. How do I know that a threat feed is better or worse than another one? Should I buy iDefense if I already own Recorded Future? Is a question that's super hard to answer unless you have a metric that you're trying to maximize.
How much do they cost?
Mm-hmm.
I want the cheapest.
Well, I mean, jumping is a good point. Cost is certainly a variable in your equation.
Absolutely. Yeah. It should be a variable in the matrix, right? You might see a 10% reduction in coverage, but you just saved yourself $900,000 for your vulnerability scanner. Maybe that's worth it.
Right. Definitely. But so have you published how you study and evaluate threat feeds? Because to be fully transparent, we're working on building a labs component, which is coming along very well. I'm very excited about it. And I don't want to be the entity or source that's saying you should buy this product over that product, right? Because that's just, I don't think there's much value in that based on everything we've said during this segment, essentially. I want to be more of the, here's how you evaluate, here are some of the features and capabilities, and here's how you evaluate, because I think that's more valuable. And so, Michael, when you say you've evaluated some of the threat feeds, my question to you is, how have you evaluated them?
Let's get specific. So we have two metrics we really care about when we look at threat intelligence data. There's replication, and then there's coverage. So replication is, I've got a set of threat intelligence. Let's say I've got a set of MD5s tied to CVEs that I get from Reversing Labs. They're actually quite good at this, at like reversing the malware and figuring out how it got in there. If I am getting a new threat feed, how many of the ones that I already know about being tied to CVEs does this new feed cover? That's replication. And then there's coverage, which is, the iceberg under the sea part of security. I'm seeing what's above it. I'm seeing what I already have. How much deeper am I going by getting this threat feed? What's net new here? And if you measure that in a percentage-based sense, for example, and I'll give you an actual example. we have a relationship with Silo Breaker now where they're finding some exploits for us. And we've had a relationship with Alien Vault's OTX2, AT&T's, I guess, OTX2 now, the labs component there. Jaime Blasco runs that. When we look at how many net new exploits we get by buying the Silo Breaker threat intelligence feed compared to what OTX was giving us, that might be a 10% increase in the number of exploits that our customers will get access to. But the replication might be 80%. So we have increased confidence that the 80% of the exploit data that's coming from Alien Vault is not a false positive. And those are two metrics that work for us because we have a specific outcome we're looking for, which is prioritization. But once you have these two metrics, any new threat feed is really easy for me to say whether that's valuable to me or not. Because if your replication is low and your coverage increase is not positive, this feed is useless to me. I already know all the information you're telling me. I'm not going to buy it. And if you're increasing my net new coverage by 5%, but you cost $500,000, I also don't need that. I've got a budget to work with. Once the metrics are established, it becomes super easy to evaluate how those metrics are changed over time by looking at new tools.
Yeah, but now let's relate this to vitamins. When you say reversing labs, I like reversing labs because I like Mario, and I've talked with Mario, their founder, several times. And therefore, if when it comes to vitamins, I want to use reversing labs, right?
I mean, that is always there too.
Yeah.
I also like them for that reason too, not just for the data.
Yeah, shameless plug for reversing labs. I do think they have, when you look at the data, they have a very good threat feed as well. I think you're agreeing as well, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious, from when you say net new, is there additionally, like what you guys are talking about, is there a net value add or a net value you have a net new, but you also have the ability to concisely give you accurate information, and not necessarily all new information is warranted. So is there metrics and means to those quality, that kind of net new, and the quality that it provides with inside of it?
Yeah, that's the replication metric. It's really hard to measure quality. It's really hard to measure quality for me because I'm not a security researcher. But I also think in general, like somebody wrote something about a vulnerability, whether it's a number of IOCs or the existence of an exploit, it's hard to measure how accurate that information is. So the replication metric is essentially, we have 6 or 7 feeds. How many of them does this information occur in? Should tell you, like on average, an exploit should occur in 5 of these 6 feeds. Like 80% of exploits should be in all of the feeds or something like that. And if this new feed doesn't have 80% of what we've seen before, then their research isn't covering what other folks are. It's like the table stakes isn't there, is that metric.
Is that bad or good, or does it depend on the situation?
I think it depends on what you're looking for. I think you have multiple approaches here. You could have an approach where what you really want is confidence that every exploit you're recommending remediation of is in fact a risk. And then you're maximizing replication. But once you've got a high amount of confidence in your exploits, the next thing you want to do is expand your coverage. It's like you might buy, a convertible and an SUV to cover your car shopping needs, or you might buy a crossover with a moonroof, and those are two valid approaches to the same problem.
It's interesting. I still think that as we progress through this industry, we need to get better at evaluating the solutions. I think it's what we're coming down to, right? It
Absolutely.
Can't just be a feeling. Oh, that's part of it, right? It can't just be just looking at the data. Everyone is really a unique kind of flower in this scenario. Every enterprise does things differently. You have different systems, different people. There's a lot of factors to come down to. Even thinking about how you evaluate something might be different across organizations. I don't think it's the same process or same answer. I think some general guidelines that could help, but I don't think it's the same for everyone. I mean,
context changes the whole equation. We've got a customer that really cares about Google vulnerabilities, Chrome, Chromium, what have you. So there might be a threat intelligence vendor that provides amazing Google Chrome 0 days and not much else, which wouldn't be very valuable to somebody who really cares about Microsoft vulnerabilities. But that customer should be buying that all day.
I do want to talk about data. One of the other things we talked about when we talked about XDR, and we talked about my enchanted quadrants, there are a couple of different schools of thought. And again, coming back to, you may choose one or the other or some kind of hybrid, but I want to get your take on this, Michael, being a data scientist. In cybersecurity, we can say there are schools of thought that are like, give me all the data. Give me as much data as you want to give me. In fact, a lot of the vendors in the SIM or SIM related spaces are like, yeah, we know Splunk's got a thing and they charge more the more data you take in. You know what? Our model is, give us as much data as you want. We're not going to charge you more for it because we want to collect all the data, and then we'll help you make sense of it. There's other schools of thought that are like, a lot of the data sources let's stick to my enchanted quadrants for a moment. A lot of the data sources within those quadrants, some are better than others. And we've evaluated those sources and said, you know what? If we had this, and this, within those quadrants, we take Sysmon and we take authentication logs from AD and we take these threat feeds, we can produce the same, if not better, results than if you were to take more sources of data. So from a data scientist perspective, when we look at this problem, do I want more data and store all of it? Or do I want to be picky and choosy as to which data and types of data I'm taking in?
I'm trying to not misstep here.
I know I put you on the spot big time.
Yeah, my view, caveated to the fact that I work in vulnerability prioritization.
Sure.
But my view of most data science problems, not even security, epidemiology, finance, searching legal documents for bad stuff that people said in emails, a high quality outcome data set, which you can use to train a good model, plus the model, of course, is usually more valuable than a lot of data where you don't know how it was generated, you don't know its quality, it might be full of false positives.
Garbage in, garbage out, regardless of how much you're collecting, right, is the thing.
Part of it is garbage in, garbage out. Part of it is you might have more. So imagine just more variables. This is something we found when we were looking at which factors about a vulnerability are predictive of that vulnerability later being used in an exploit, just from the start. So if you use no variables, you get no information, horrible model, not very useful. If you start to add new variables into the model and try to figure out the best model you could build, at around 10 to 12 variables is where the model has the least error. And when you start moving into 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 variables, you're adding in noise into the model because your data set isn't all that great, and more information can sometimes actually obscure the model's outcomes. So in the same way, ultimately you're digging through this haystack for these needles, and limiting the haystack can be helpful. Limiting the haystack too much could mean that you're missing things. But most organizations have a risk tolerance level and a profile they're going for. And again, once you have that metric of, I want to capture 60% of malicious activity on the front end, you can start to tailor how much data collection you need to do that once you know what your success rate is.
So it sounds like one of the components that was missing in my brain is what are the variables you're collecting, right? 'Cause you can collect a lot of data to get the dozen or so variables, right? But that's just going to reinforce your model that's already pretty good. It's more about the variables than the amount of data, right? I can say, well, I really want like destination, IP address, and port, and those are two very important variables. The more of that I get, the better. But then if I start collecting all their headers in the IP, TCP, and like full packet, then my model could start falling down.
So this might be the only valuable part of having me on the show. When we say big data, people often think we mean a lot of data. That's not the case. We mean volume, velocity, and variability of data. Those are three dimensions of data being big. More volume, usually always good. More velocity, not always great. So if I'm getting second by second log data, that might be not as useful as hour by hour log data if it's aggregated correctly. The resolution matters. And then variability is what we're talking about when we're talking about how many facets you collect. And oftentimes the messiest models and the messiest data comes from variability, not volume.
That's really interesting.
Because volume you can solve with dollars, but variability you can't.
That's fascinating. That's awesome.
Which is also why malware reversal or malware identification on the fly is really hard, because it actually requires a lot of variables. Whereas something like, vulnerability identification is seemingly easier because the product and vendor covers a lot of what you're talking about when you look at the vuln.
It's also interesting to draw those parallels between epidemiology. We do that quite a bit with Dr. Mike Lloyd from Red Seal. And now that you've kind of enlightened me to the more nuances of data collection and analysis, it seems like in epidemiology, we could have a set of variables, but we still just don't have enough volume of data. My wife, for example, works in healthcare, and often we collectively have these questions, and I'm like, well, if you were exposed to a lot of different coronaviruses, does that mean that you might have more immunity to the COVID-19 strain of coronaviruses? And what does that mean that you got the vaccine? So you did get the vaccine. Does that mean that you are more immune to other strains of coronavirus? And I was kind of explaining to her, like, if you in healthcare were exposed to a lot of coronaviruses, that means you might be resilient to more forms of it, regardless of whether you got the vaccine, if that makes any sense, right? 'Cause she was like, well, I don't think I'm going to get as many colds now that I have the vaccine. I'm like, yeah, but if you were exposed to all those other strains, that would already mean that you were less likely to get a cold. And I'm like, likely we just don't have enough data to answer any of these questions, definitively.
Well,
there's a lot of parallels.
Because we're not collecting likelihood of cold after vaccine. That's not a thing we're collecting, so we can't really make a statement about it.
Right. And that's a direct correlation to your net. What do you want to collect so you can make decisions, maybe not today, but in the future, right? It's hard to predict what data you might need in the future for the next threat, such as solar winds might have been a newer threat for a lot of people. Did you collect the right data, right? I guess that could be an argument for collecting more data, because you never know when you're going to use it. That's always the argument that you get from especially vendors that charge you the more data you collect. You never know when you might need all that data, right? You may not need it today, but you might need it tomorrow.
It often comes down to what's the business problem you're trying to solve. If the business problem you're trying to solve is specific to CVEs, you might not need to be collecting this data, hoping that in the future you get to use it. If it's increasing your coverage of known malware variants, collect the stuff about known malware variants. Don't collect the stuff about random net flow. But if it's an open-ended problem where you do hope to comb over past data and come up with something new, those are usually costlier, and for good reason.
Questions, comments from the illustrious crew?
None here.
Very deep and philosophical about data. I loved it. We love having you on the show, Michael. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience today? I
want you to share that pineapple CBD drink that you're into.
Yeah,
it honestly sounds like pineapple pizza.
I haven't ordered it yet. I need to order just to try it, maybe to drink some on the show, because it sounds fabulous. And you would, I think, love this, Larry, because I want to say you're really into pineapple and jalapeno. So this is a pineapple jalapeno CBD drink. It's like Joe Rogan's. I forget the brand. He worked with a brand to create it.
See,
it sounds amazing. I haven't tried it yet.
I love spicy, but like drinking spicy.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. It must be. It's a carbonated energy drink of some kind. I believe it does have caffeine in it as well.
I mean, the pineapple I get. I mean,
yeah, because pineapple's awesome, right? Killcliff, thank you, is the brand. Yeah, it sounds super interesting.
It turns you yellow.
And it turns you
yellow.
Turns you yellow.
And if you take colloidal silver, you turn green.
There's the exercise. How do we measure? How do we measure the effectiveness of it? And again, I think it just comes to, wow, like it tastes good and I don't feel horrible, so therefore I'll keep drinking it, right? Maybe that's how we make a lot of our product decisions today in security, right?
That's actually more true than we like to think, because most people switch vendors after an incident, not before.
Right.
The UX looks nice, so that's our product.
That's true. That is a component to it. Well, I mean, but usability is a thing, so.
I think we're going to do a lot better. I think that's the hope that I have for this new XDR space that's emerging. It's that in order for it to work, we're going to have to start measuring the efficacy of the subcomponents. And as vendor, like if one vendor does it, everybody else is going to have to start doing it too. And then all of a sudden we're in a world where we're actually measuring some kind of outcomes for all of these tools, and choosing between them becomes much easier for consumers.
Well,
Pipe
Michael,
dream.
thank you very much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. It's always nice having you on the show.
Always nice to be here.
For folks who want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. Stay tuned. Dan DeCloss from PlexTrac coming up next.
sophisticated attackers are targeting credentials to escalate privileges. Ativo Networks provides an innovative solution that finds, cleans, and monitors exposed credentials to reduce attack surfaces. Additionally, the solution alerts when attackers try accessing Active Directory objects while hiding data and derailing them with disinformation. Organizations can go one step further and hide real credentials among deceptive lures that lead attackers to decoys for recording TTPs and forensic evidence. Find out more at securityweekly.com/Ativo Networks and sign up for a free trial. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you'd like us to cover on one of the upcoming shows? If so, submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete the form, and we review those on a regular basis, and we'll get back to you. Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly. This segment is sponsored by PlexTrac. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/PlexTrac. Joining us for this segment is the podcasting expert, Mr. Dan DeCloss. Dan, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody. Good to be back.
You seem like so much more comfortable now on podcast, and for our listeners out there,
I'm all settled in. Got a mic.
That's it. So we, myself, Dan, and a bunch of other folks, recorded a 3-part podcast series that we're releasing. So make sure you go to securityweekly.com/PlexTrac. We'll put a link to it there and more information about it. But we did a 3-hour recording marathon session. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I enjoyed it.
We'll try and cover different content on this segment.
Sure.
We'll tease out a little bit of that content as well. And in this segment, we're going to talk about discussing effective assessments, the maturity of your security posture. When are you ready, right? That was the title for this. How tall do you need to be to ride the ride? When are you ready to do?
And see, I thought Santa Cangelo was coming.
Santa Cangelo kind of coined the term of like how tall they need to be to ride the ride. It was really to evaluate, vendor solutions, right?
Yep.
You can also apply the same logic to like, when am I ready for a vuln assessment, a red team, compliance, purple team, all those things? When am I ready? So Dan, take it away.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's like, what's the progression of like the types of assessments that we should be doing in our environment for where we're at as a team, right? And as an organization, what maturity level? You hear a lot about how mature do we need to be in order to reach certain phases of different assessments. And I think it's an important thing to talk about in terms of what types of assessments should you start with as you're just getting off the ground versus if you're a well-oiled machine from a security team perspective, and what are the next types of assessments you can be doing or should be doing. And I definitely, you kind of meet people all across the spectrum in terms of, they've got a pretty mature program in terms of they have a lot of technology in place. They've got a lot of good processes in place, and they still will say, "Okay, we're not ready for a pen test. We can't have somebody coming in." And sometimes there's a fear factor there. I think,
but sometimes it's the other way around, because I've had conversations with the organization. I'm like, "So tell me about like your risk tolerance," and they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "All right, well, tell me about your security policies," and they're like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Wait, shouldn't we have a pen test?" I'm like, no, not yet.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know that it's going to provide a lot of value, right? But I think it's important, and so I love the concept of how tall do you have to be, right? Just a side note, it reminds me of, we took our young son to Disneyland. This was several years ago now, but he was right at the edge of being tall enough to get on most of the rides.
Right.
So we just put a little bit of
cushion in the shoes. We've done that.
Just a little thicker shoes.
Because there's nothing worse as a parent to have an upset child because they can't ride the ride. That just ruins the day for everyone, not just you and your family, but anyone who's around. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Can lead to
but he made it to
meltdown.
the last one, right? And then by the end of the day, things had started to kind of
squish down.
Right? So
gravity's a thing.
that last ride, he just like went ballistic. We're like, well, bud, you made it through most of them. So
right.
Anyway, but that's totally a side note. I was like, the title of the topic is fun.
Yeah, but it is kind of a thing, I think, with a lot of organizations that they want to believe they're ready for, let's say, a red team assessment, but they're more likely going to benefit better from a questionnaire and then take action based on those answers to the questionnaire, like have a vulnerability management and patching program first before you have someone come in and test the security of your organization. The questionnaire focused around, well, what technologies are you using and what, process and procedures do you have in place? Have you consolidated some of your technologies? If you haven't done any of that, you likely, Dan, like you're not ready to do any assessment above and beyond probably that questionnaire, or more, Jeff, to, kind of your specialty compliance-based assessment. But they still want to jump right into a red team because, I don't know, that's what they talk to their friends about. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think there's that luster and appeal of a red team, pen test, those kinds of things. But what you hit it on the head in terms of having your processes in place first, right? When we talk about maturity of organizations, you can have all the technology in the world in all the the hip next gen everything, and still really not have it be effective because you don't have the processes in place. You don't have the people to manage the tools and the platforms that you're using to assess these things. So that's largely shelfware at that point. So I think what's most important for folks to focus on early on is the process. Do we have the processes in place? Could we emulate everything that we need to do with pen and paper today? And then you can talk about what do we need to automate? What tools do we need to go buy?
Right.
But if you haven't done put the elbow grease into the process, you're going to be in for a long haul.
Yeah, how do you manage your privileged users? Like, what do you mean manage? I just shove people in domain admins. I never went back and looked at the list. Like that's Tyler and Larry are already laughing because they're like, whoa, wait.
Yeah, and to clarify, when you say having processes in place, to what degree do you mean they have to be written down, documented, published, people know where to find it, and not that they follow it line by line every time they do their job, but to what degree does you mean that they're written down? That's my question.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think from my experience, we've always recommended people do some form of like a wiki, or something that's at least loose enough to be able to put down notes and procedures. I don't think it's not a formal process if it's not written down, but you certainly can even just start with like, hey, this is how we're going to formalize the process. So I think, before you start talking about a penetration test, most of those processes I think should be in some kind of a written form, but I think, and you've probably seen this a lot, Jeff, in terms of, people will have what's written and then what's actually done. Right. So I think what's more important is making sure that what you do, what reality looks like in the day is actually what is reflected on the paper. And so those should be written in some capacity and in a loose fashion at first, right? So that you at least are starting to get into the mindset of like, if somebody leaves the organization, we know where to look to be able to continue to repeat these processes and have these things documented in some capacity. I wouldn't say you have to have like a super, well fleshed out documentation process before you could start advancing in the different types of assessments that you're going to conduct. But the documentation is important.
Yeah, but it can't just be the policy, right? It can't be, and Jeff and others, I'm sure you've seen this, where, we have a security policy. It says all our systems will be patched within 30 days. And then you go to the team and they're like, we have a policy? Wait, it says every 30 days?
30 days?
We're just trying to keep things running. Like, we don't really have a process for that yet.
Well, and I would say I have seen mostly in my years of working with customers, primarily in the PCI world, more the net effect of not having documented processes. And guess what? PCI requires formal processes for pretty much everything that PCI requires, which is funny because people like to make fun of PCI as a checkbox exercise, but like 60% of PCI is, do you have something written on paper or
right.
digitized? And to me, the beauty of it always was, you come in and ask them, well, let's see everything. Let's see all the paperwork, your policies, your standards, procedures. That looks great. Now go show me that you're doing it. And of course, like you said, Paul, that's where it kind of all falls apart.
It can fall down at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there are cases we have to.
Go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say, I think there are cases where we do have to be aware that where there are many organizations that are not ready for a security assessment or a pen test or a red team for that matter, there are political things and business risk aspects that get pushed down from either not top-down buy-in, they need buy-in for security budget, they are the only one that thinks security is an issue. There are cases that we see quite often where, you do not have, like, the security guy gets it and you have an open dialogue with them, but the rest of the organization doesn't get that, and they need the impact of something that is shock and awe. And those are the cases where, that's kind of the purpose of the red team, is to come in. We know you're going to own them. They're not in a good spot, but you have to do that in certain cases. And that's not the way I'd like to do it. It's always better to start with, seeing where they're at, tailoring the assessment to their capabilities. But the sad truth is there is a lot of organizations that just do not have that capability or that buy-in or that maturity mindset yet. And so getting the mindset first in order to have that conversation, to have people and asset owners and budget owners sit down and be a part of that conversation, I think is step one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the culture of the organization plays a large part in that, right? I mean, security budgets increase, substantially when they've been breached. And so I think, Tyler, we've experienced this in the past where, sometimes the way to get a security budget is to, do a covert pen test and show a webcam shot of the CEO or something, and then all of a sudden, the light bulb goes off that, what, we should do this. Otherwise, this could be a lot worse. So there's definitely those kinds of things. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a maturity discussion. That's a maturity discussion of, like, just getting the ball rolling with, getting the resources you need to even just start your security program, or at least, get it to a point where you really can be effective. Right.
Jeff?
Well, you're actually touching on something that I wanted to ask as a sort of a point of clarification / pet peeve of mine. Asking the question, how tall do you need to be to ride the ride? What's your maturity level? Are you ready for a pen test? Implies that it happens later. And I would agree with that. It's all the way deep down in requirement 11 of the PCI standard. And it's really designed to, after you've done all the things, test it.
Is that 11? Is it 11.3 is the pen test?
Correct.
Oh, very good. I got something right. See, Jeff, I'm learning. It only took how many years?
Progress.
So proud of
I think that means you need a drink.
Yes, I do.
And get me another ice cube.
Cheers.
But I hear people talking more often than is comfortable, and it seems to be a prevailing philosophy, if you will, within the industry, which, to be honest, is how I started in the private sector 25 years ago. You're plugging into the internet. You really should have a pen test to find out what you need to do, what your tools and weaknesses are. But I would like to think that we've moved on from that. So I hear people talking about how you start by having a pen test to see what all your problems are. And of course, the way a lot of pen tests are, it's just a technical test. It's the glorified vulnerability scan. It doesn't touch at all on what are all the things missing in your policies and your procedures and in your business operations. And I've had this conversation with Adrian. I think this is the first conversation I had when I met him, was like, if you know what you're doing as a security professional, even if, call yourself a pen tester or not, you can have a half an hour conversation with a company and pretty much know what their problems are just by talking to them. Mm-hmm. And why not just do that rather than go through the cool, sexy, we had a pen test. When is the right time to have a pen test, and when, if ever, is a pen test appropriate to start the ball rolling on a security program? Your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I'll address that last part first. I think the kind of where we were talking before is using a penetration test to help identify some of the more severe risks that might help free up budget or free up some resources to get your your executive staff thinking in the right direction. Certainly that's when I would recommend, like, yeah, let's do something like this to at least kind of have that pop and wow factor. If you've already got that, then I think it's important to, I think we've even talked about this on the show before, Paul, is about what's the right scope for the pen test. And that's really where it starts to come down to is, you can start early with pen testing if you're scoping it correctly. You're not going to, and have the expectations that this isn't going to be the broad sweeping, attack surface management type of a pen test where you're going to get extreme coverage on every single type of risk and vulnerability or vector that could get in. But it could be, hey, I want to actually, test some of the aspects of our lateral movement, protections. And that even starts to play into, where we're continuing to evolve as an industry with respect to purple team engagements, right? Being able to take small chunks of that puzzle and starting to piece them together with small assessments that actually you can measure and grow and show your progress over time. So I think that every organization might be a little bit different as to when they want to start doing that from a pen test perspective. But I think that there are ways to utilize pen testing, and it's not just meeting the PCI annual requirement. It's actually helping address some of those needs as the team continues to mature and grow. So I tend to always come back to the attack lifecycle and how do we measure our progress there as to what tactics and techniques attackers are going to be using in our environment. But again, having some of those processes already in place to be able to detect these things, knowing what we would be looking for. Do we have any kind of alerting mechanism to help us in the analysis phase, right?
I think one of the important pieces there too that really plays into getting an early pen test is the security and maturity or education or fundamental understanding of the offensive security space by whoever is having to do the defense. One of the prioritizations that should be happening inside of an offensive engagement by a red team or a good pen test company is helping you identify where to put your resources, time, and energy. You're a defender. Yeah, you may be a security practitioner and you may have an understanding of all the attacks, but your ability to identify and weigh risk of what the threat landscape is, what attackers are currently using, and how to prioritize those risks to build a good 2 to 5 year security roadmap becomes very difficult, especially, you know your org very well, you know your environment very well, but you may not know what to focus on and at what means to put something like, SMB signing into place. Is that going to actually mitigate all the risks for the vertical I'm in with all of the protections and mitigating factors that I currently have in place? So being able to identify those and have a strategic roadmap to kind of work on is a good argument to do that first and have that penetration test. And that's an open dialogue with your security company. If you don't have that communication and the test is not tailored towards you and built to your kind of maturity level and capability level, then yeah, that's not going to do you any good. But a good security firm will do that, and they will provide a good roadmap, and they will provide fundamental recommendations and remediations to act upon over the next 2 to 5 years that you can then build something on. And that's an education piece.
It's one of the things in my experience that you have to, and I don't want to place blame, but defining the goals before you start a test is big. And I think some of my experience definitely tailored the questions that I asked, because there was this one time on a pen test where I got in, I think it was the pen test where I had taken over the radio station. Yeah.
I remember you telling me about that one.
Yeah, but so I went into the test and I was wildly successful in the first couple of days. This was a week-long test. And midway through the test, the CISO pulls me into his office at the time, and he was like, yeah, you can't talk to the team anymore. You can't be working with the team anymore, because as you're finding stuff, they're furiously going in and trying to fix it and make sure you don't find anything else. And he's like, the goal of this test was not so much the technical processes of the test, but it was to highlight some of the political environment. And looking back, I would have been like, oh, it would have been nice to know that before the test started, right? But they were the customer, and I didn't ask the right questions, and it was a learning experience for everyone, right? So I think that, to a lot of the folks' points, how you use the test is very important, but also how you communicate what the goal should be before you start the test is probably the most important thing. Gauging their security maturity is a mutual exercise that requires, and Larry, Tyler, Jeff, right, you spend a lot of time with clients probably having these conversations, hopefully learning from some of my experiences and others, where you don't want to be midway through a test and then understand the goals of the test. That's way too late, right?
Yep. Yeah. One of the other things I learned too is that you don't want to be doing an overnight pen test and get root on some system at a ICS network and realize that you have to call the customer because I've already had 12 beers. And you probably weren't in much better shape.
Or worse yet, the team not realizing they had a pen test and they're calling for an international, cyber incident that's a different discussion. That's probably a different hour-long discussion.
Or you're having a cert advisory issued against you.
Yes.
The tenant forgot to notify the base.
And Tyler, what kind of masks should you wear on a red team? On a physical. The kind in the picture behind you, right?
Ones that have the permission slip printed on them, so that when people get close, they can read the permission slip right from your mask.
Yeah, not a bad guy.
Not the hacker.
I don't have a weapon.
but getting back to the focus on process, which I agree with, we've had conversations, I think on air, various episodes where I've asked Larry and Joff, and I don't know if Tyler's been in on any of these conversations, but I as somebody that has to very commonly and often review pen test reports to see if they meet the PCI requirement of 11.3, I wish that I would see more. Well, I wish I would see an actual pen test report and not just a vulnerability scan output. A. B, what I really wish and think more pen tests should be in terms of root cause and talks of, we found all these problems, but in terms of root cause and what the real problem is, talk about the process that isn't in place that is, causing that systems are out there with misconfigurations or causing or allowing people to use, weak or default passwords, all the reasons why we drink. I think Larry and Joff have said that they do try to put that into their reports. I've never had to read one. I've never had the honor of reading one of their reports. I just don't see that very often, if at all, that truly capturing here's what your problem is, which again, you can probably tell the customer just sitting down with them for an hour or two and just talking shop, with their admins and with the security staff and so on and so forth. That's my experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the findings that typically come out of a pen test report really could be extrapolated into, or abstracted into a few projects, right? Like here are some of the projects that really result or are the root cause of why you have a lot of these issues. Like, hey, you've got some system configuration management issues, right? So let's find a STIG, right, to really start implementing across your environment. That can help with a lot of these problems. Yeah, and so I agree. I think some of the better firms are actually going to do that, and so picking the right firm is and the right partner is an important piece to that puzzle.
But Dan, to Jeff's point, making sure the organization has good teamwork and communications, probably step one, right? And we mentioned Michael Santarcangelo. That's largely what he does, right? Is coach people on those communication and teamwork issues. I think that has to exist as the first thing. You have to have a team that's willing to work together with management and go, yeah, we're admitting you have a problem as the first step, I think. But identify those. Then I think you're ready to start moving forward, right? And your product PlexTrac gives you that foundation, provided that communication and teamwork is set in motion. And Jeff, I think some of what you might be experiencing is tests that are producing the technical results, but kind of ignoring the fact that there are systemic communication and teamwork problems that could be, in a lot of cases, the fundamental problem as to why security is not getting done in the organization.
Well, you're effectively defining process, because there are always process problems or lack of process problems. I wanted to mention, though, that you may not be aware that the little research project that I did with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. That I've done a couple of presentations. I don't know if you're aware of that, Dan.
I am.
Okay, well, to your point of, all the findings would boil down to a few projects, for those companies that are like latching onto, well, let's pen test a red team according to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and let's see how we do. And my hunch that, okay, PCI probably addresses all of these things in one way, shape, or form. I was astonished to find that one single requirement addressed, or has the potential of addressing, in terms of mitigations of all the things that are in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. One PCI requirement addresses 30% of the MITRE attacks.
Is that 11.3? No, that's the only one I know. So I gotta go with what I know.
We're talking. No, that's a good guess. It's gosh, you're putting me on the spot now. It is 2.2, and that requirement is develop configuration standards for all your systems.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how, I've been in the space a long time, 15 plus years now. And that's where I started. I started in the DoD.
That's not a long time.
STIGs.
Some of us.
Some of us. I didn't want to say it. But, I've been a lot. What's sad is like half my team or more are younger than I am now. Right. So I'm starting to feel on the other side here, but, that's where I started. I started applying STIGs to systems all across our agency, right? So, we're still in that mode, and I think that doesn't get communicated very well through some of these assessments, right? And that's an important process to start putting in place early. And Tenable has the compliance checks. There's lots of ways to be able to do this, but you're exactly right, Jeff. A large part of the ways that people like Larry and Tyler can do what they do is simply because there's just a lack of secure configuration. Now there's always going to be the cases where you can't apply certain configs, right? But from the technical side, that's a large part of it. And there's things that a pen test is not necessarily going to be able to solve. Well, I guess it's not going to solve anything anyways, but when you have like communication breakdowns within your organization and are not able to effectively collaborate, that's another process issue, and that's another culture issue. And so I think,
but also it could be a technology issue, Dan, and something you and I have spoken about in relation to the talent shortage. And I think the kind of parallels between the podcast automation software that we built in your product are pretty staggering, in that even if you have a good process and good communication, the technology that you're using to implement that process and have that communication, if it's disparate and not in full support of your process, it can fall down. If we're still relying on email and spreadsheets and people using a ticketing system incorrectly for what it's not intended to do, and granted, that's better than not having a process, right? So we're moving a little higher on the maturity curve. But I think once you're at that point, there's so many organizations and teams that don't have the proper technology supporting their processes. And like I said, if you're emailing spreadsheets around, using email for everything, even using Slack incorrectly, or all these different technologies, those have to support your processes, right? They can't define your requirements. Your requirements have to define in your technology that you're implementing, but that's a huge piece of it, right?
Yeah, the automation and the frameworks really, should remove the friction that you have, without it, right?
Now, Dan, be careful with automation, because I find I get a negative reaction when I use the word automation.
Sure.
What I tend to use, feel free to use this in your marketing and sales, right, is improve your workflow, right? Like you've got the process, you've got good process, good communication. You don't necessarily want to automate it, because that kind of scares people a little bit, but I want to improve your workflow. Now people start to understand that technology is helping me, not trying to replace something that requires a human, right?
Sure.
Automatically
yeah,
improve your workflow.
Yeah, it's automatically improve your workflow.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. Is that, we have you may have a good process in place and having a good culture for communication. Just you have a lot of friction in how you do that, right? So being able to centralize those workflows, centralize the communication and collaboration, only continues to speed up the process. And when you talk about quote unquote automation, which has been a big topic in our space for a long time, right? But what does that really mean? And really, at the end of the day, you hit it on the head. Is it's actually you're trying to find ways to get time back.
Yeah,
right?
it's workflow efficiency, right?
Exactly.
Making people more efficient.
In our space, there's nothing more exacerbated than the talent shortage because of time, right? I mean, it's like, we have a talent shortage. So therefore, the lack of time that we have is even more. It continues to exacerbate the problem, is what I'm trying to say, right? And so the more time that you get back in your current processes, the better, as long as you're utilizing that time correctly, right?
But I feel like we're in an unfair advantage. Those of us that are 15 years or more in, and maybe have picked up a programming language or two, it comes almost second nature for us. For many of us to go, I can write a script to help me automate that part of my workflow. And I think sometimes we erroneously assume that everyone works that way, and that's not the case. That we have to provide the kind of workflow automation to others across the multiple teams.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that's what your product does. In one of the things it does really well.
Yeah. Our goal is to help everybody, in any portion of the security team to really stay focused on their work, getting their work done, and being able to communicate and collaborate effectively with the other teams. And so that's really what PlexTrac's goal and mission is to keep remove the friction from all of these workflows in order to be able to continue to move the needle forward, from the security posture, from your assessment program. And that's the ultimate goal.
And I feel like we used to make jokes about it. Like I used to have the t-shirt or the mug that said I'll replace you with a very small shell script. But like that was a joke, but I'm like, no, like that's really like when you're I was a Unix admin, right? And many of us have held positions like that in the past. Like that was really the goal, was to automate things with a small shell script. Like that was a win every single day if we could do that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And you see it in the SOC world, right? And you see it in the pen testing world. Like if I'm not, how many people remember all the Nmap flags that you need to, off the top of your head, right?
That's
that's stuff we automated all the time.
Well, and that's what GitHub's for. Because once you get beyond I want to like put a shell script around running this command, what I'm realizing today that I think is absolutely phenomenal is now there's, for any given task that we might have done, not only can we automate the flags to Nmap, but we can find 3 open source projects that have put like a full wrapper and maybe 3 different frameworks that like completely automates it with a web interface and the whole thing. Like we're really, I tell my kids this all the time, like you're spoiled. Like I wasn't able to go to Google and then watch a YouTube video that told me exactly how to fix my problem. Like I had to read the manual and figure it out on my own.
Or more importantly, I had to go to the library
to get a book and read the book about how to
card catalog with a Dewey Decimal System to find that book.
Yeah. I think one important thing on the scripting side is that you can get in danger of not really understanding what's going on right under the hood. Kind of like your math teacher used to tell you, like, hey, don't just rely on the calculator.
Show your work. You got to be able to show your work first. I'm a huge believer in that, Dan. Yes.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, kids these days have it easy, right? We had to write all our own stuff, right?
Jeff, did you also say that back in the day? Is it just like a thing that everyone says, regardless of the point in time? That, like,
When I was 20,
today have it easy. Like, were you saying that like 20 plus years ago? Like kids today?
No, I'm just trying to be like my dad, right?
There was a point when I was a dad when my son became a teenager, and I caught myself saying something to him, and he's like, "Shit, I gotta go call my dad and apologize." Right?
Yeah.
There was also the time with my son. I came home from work, and my son met me at the door saying, "Dad, the TV's broken." So I walked over and I turned the TV on, and I'm pushing the buttons to change the channels. I said, "It seems to be working fine, son." And he picks up the remote and starts pushing the buttons. It's like, "No, it's broken. It's not working." And that's where I said, son, back in my day, I had to walk 10 miles uphill in the snow
Just
to
to
walk
change the
over to the
channel.
TV
Yeah.
to spin a dial.
Yes, I remember those.
And the dial was broken off, so we had to use pliers.
pliers. Yeah.
Or sometimes a screwdriver, depending on.
If it didn't come in, you had to adjust the tinfoil around the rabbit ears.
What, you had tinfoil? I had to stand there like
stand
this.
there. Your dad used to make you stand there and watch the game, right?
My grandfather had this really cool box that you spun the dial, and it would actually turn.
We had one of those when I was growing
And
up.
he lived in
Yeah.
a row house, and I used to try to spin the dial and then try to run out the back of the house
To
and
see
into the backyard
Yeah.
far enough to get to a point where I could actually see it moving.
Yeah.
It was it took. It's what made me so fast. An Olympic athlete.
See, I used to have to stand there like that.
Yeah.
We didn't have the tinfoil because my dad was too busy spending his money on a 200-foot tower that he put up in the backyard
Right.
and put the TV antenna on top of that.
Nice.
You couldn't get out there fast enough to see it.
I don't know how we got here, but we did. I'm glad we did.
Get off my
actually.
lawn!
It's-
Yeah.
Strolled on
And
memory
back
lane.
in my day, we knew how we got places.
But yeah, I think we, talking about automation and maturity and things like that. I think what it kind of where we've narrowed it down to is like, one, get some good processes in place. Find a partner if you don't have in-house talent to really help you hone in some of those early processes, and find somebody that's going to help grow with you.
Yeah, but then also to your point of understanding how it works. What I've also done, like knowing what your process is super important. And I find you often can't just jump to like having a good process and having technology that implements it. You almost have to do the analog, which is why I love whiteboards. Like sometimes I'm like, I think we know what the process is now, but let's get the whiteboard out and we're going to use that. And now we know our processes sound. Now let's go get the technology to help with those workflow improvements and workflow automation.
Exactly. Don't let the technology drive how you're going to implement your process, right?
Yeah.
Let your process implement how you're going to go about getting the technology, right? And that'll help drive what technology you invest in next, right?
Yeah, it was
because otherwise,
the Phoenix project did a great job of that when they had the whiteboard with all the sticky notes, right? Well, I feel like that was a good exercise to show just how much work it is and how it can be analog, much to our antenna examples from when we're growing up, right? You have to kind of see how that's going to play out before you can have these efficiencies, which speaks to where you are in your maturity. If you don't have any processes and you haven't had those whiteboard sessions and done it in an analog manner, I mean, you're not going to appreciate the workflow automations, but also you're not going to know how to implement them, right?
Right. Yeah. I think documenting that stuff is exactly where you start, right? It's like, hey, this is if this happens in our environment, what do we do, right? And let's talk through that before you say, oh, we need to go get a sim to that's going to solve all our problems, right? Then you're just going to end up, like I said, kind of earlier on the show, you're just going to end up with a lot of shelfware and no real effectiveness coming out of the investments that you're making. And then I think you were talking on the first segment around how do we know what we've been investing in works, right? So that's an important piece, and I think often gets overlooked as we talk to folks about growing their program, maturing their organization from a security perspective, and knowing which technology investments to make first on the security side.
And I think this all helps the conversation we've had to know and listen to the series we created, which starts with focusing on purple team, red team, and the blue team, right? Because we really dug deep into all three of those areas. And specifically when it comes to assessments, the red team and purple team. So Dan and Tyler, I know you appeared on one of those episodes as well. Because maybe just at a high level, kind of tease out what we talked about there and why people should listen.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was great. It was great discussion on all three episodes. From the blue team side, we really talked about what does it look like to get the real work done in the blue team, right?
And that was the goal of the series, getting the real work done.
The whole series is what does the real work look like in all three of these components of your security program. And I think we also highlighted on the purple team side that you can start early. You can start doing that internally.
And I just want to say we had Bryson Bort from Scythe on that, and his beard, I mean, it's just epic.
Oh yeah, you're in for a treat for sure.
You have to tune in the video of that just for Bryson's beard, because it is his spirit animal for sure.
Right. Yeah.
He's gone totally Moses.
Yes.
Yeah.
After coming down from whatever it was, Mount Ararat.
Was it Mount Ararat?
So on the purple team side, just knowing you can start those things early on, and don't have to have an external, pay a lot of money for an external firm to come in and do that for you. There's a lot of frameworks out there, selfless plug for, PlexTrac, but, being able to start standardizing your processes through a platform like PlexTrac and being able to get those processes implemented early and often and documented, right? I mean, it serves as that documentation capability as well. And then, Tyler, I'll let you talk about kind of what some of the goals for the red team of getting the real work done. But it was a really good segment.
I mean, being able to have that collaborative platform to interact just with the blue team and have the blue team available to read something outside of just a document that's delivered, some kind of dynamic and back and forth place, is a huge step in the right direction. That's something I've been like, why are we still writing documents that get printed off and like no one reads or gets lost in a file share somewhere? Like, where are the dynamic content, the interaction, the ability to put your red team to work for you? Like, if you have questions afterwards, if you have questions where you're going, if we're trying to highlight something that may have come up while we're doing the engagement, is there an area we're focusing on that doesn't have any meaning from your standpoint? Like, that dialogue and that collaboration to do that. And then from a red team standpoint, just being able to do the technical work and then not wasting any more time than you absolutely have to on the minutiae of reporting. We've said it 100 times on here. Most of us feel like we get paid to write reports because I would do this job for free. I would hack all day for free. That's what I like to do. I hate writing reports. I mean, we have to get very good at technical writing. We have to get very good at Word and formatting and knowing why there's a carriage return and an extra space after the bullet and all the stuff that really doesn't matter. That's kind of where PlexTrac is taking some of the old school time wasting pieces of something that is very important. This may be the only lasting legacy that is left behind of whatever you did at that snap point in time for an organization, but really providing the blue team with that and taking all the time and putting it back into the assessment that you'd be wasting to write reports, and then having something that you can have metrics on that you can go back to from a blue standpoint, prioritize, and have a good workflow to kind of document and keep track of all of the things that were in a report, so it doesn't just get lost in a file share in a Word doc or a PDF that's never going to get printed or read again.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to have year over year comparisons, things that you would hope, people do get visibility into from their any kind of assessment really, but specifically on the red team side, a pen test, or a deeper red team exercise. So that's our goal, right? Is to streamline those processes, to help in all the workflows from all the security teams, right? We have an assessments module for the GRC, and framework based assessments. And I think one thing, just kind of as a side note to highlight to Jeff there too, is that most of the frameworks, end up landing on a lot of this comes down to process, right? Most of the frameworks have those fundamentals as these are the key building blocks to building a really good security program.
Don't forget run books and how that can facilitate processes and procedures and provide a good framework of documentation to do certain activities.
Yeah, exactly. No, thanks. Good plug, Tyler. Thanks. No, you're exactly right. I mean, our we have a runbooks module within PlexTrac that actually can serve as that documentation for how you conduct assessments. Every assessment that you're going to do, and you can add to it and modify it. So it starts to serve as your knowledge base too. Of these are the procedures that we're consistently testing, and the more you have that documented, the quicker you're going to grow because you already have that training capability documented for your next assessment for whoever's coming on board as your next tester. It doesn't have to live in the heads of everybody anymore.
I'm excited for the release of the podcast series, which will be coming up very soon. You can find more at securityweekly.com/PlexTrac. We'll be announcing it there. Dan, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Yeah, thank you guys. Always good to be here.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back, talk about the security news, and why privacy is like bubble wrap. Stay tuned.
NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. I do have an announcement. I was totally unprepared to read said announcement, and now I have to fill time as my teleprompter scrolls through, and we will get to privacy and bubble wrap. But if you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list and join our Discord server. Also, if you missed Security Weekly Unlocked, you can now access all of the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not, by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked and clicking either the button to register or the button to log in. And with that, we'll talk about the security news for this week. I did want to start, first of all, by saying how jealous I am that one day, because on my bucket list is appearing on Darknet Diaries podcast, John Strand and Jeff Mann have lived out my dream of appearing on the Darknet Diaries podcast, and I have not yet listened to it, Jeff, but it's in the queue.
Shame on you. Well, you've heard the story. I don't think that there's anything new to learn, but every time I tell the story, I remember some little different tidbit. Yeah, so you might pick up on something.
And who? So Jack interviewed you, and who else for this episode?
Marcus Carey.
Marcus Carey. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to that.
Yeah, it's I've gotten a lot of feedback on the Twitters and the LinkedIn's. People saying, "Oh, this is the best episode yet," that kind of thing. So,
nice.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's other people who are like, "Oh my gosh, a bunch of old people talking."
It was, it was totally the best episode because Marcus was on it.
I am a big
definitely
fan.
Been that. What a great episode! Thanks, Jack and Marcus.
I am a big fan of Jeff and Marcus and the Darknet Diaries. So
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
definitely something I'm looking forward to.
No, it was fun, and I've got my own. They have unique art for every episode, so I've got cool. I forget. He tells who his artist is. I forget. I apologize off the top of my head. But
it looks like a lot of smoke, and I think there was a particular kind of smoke that maybe was emanating when the person wrote this next article titled "Why Privacy is Like Bubble Wrap." Like I really, woo! Not the easiest article to read. The author has great, inspiring ideas. The writing style was a little tough for me to overcome, but don't let that get in the way of the ideas. And there is a very lengthy first part of the article that talks about language and linguistics, and finally they get to the point of why privacy is like bubble wrap. And the article states, in a sense, we should think of privacy as not as something that resides in an individual, but something that surrounds them. Oh, that was my first wow. Okay. This is where the bubble wrap metaphor comes in, a layer that is transparent enough to allow you to be seen, but also a protection against harmful intrusion. The more bubble wrap, the more protection, but also the greater degree of constriction. Sure, I can wrap bubble wrap around my experience online. I can have no cookies, no tracking, use Proton Mail, etc., but it's going to be a slower, more plodding experience, which has its own costs. That was interesting article.
I find it interesting that one of the section headers is words have meaning or meanings, and yet we continuously struggle within our industry to come up with definitions of terms that are fundamental to our industry.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy being one of them.
For sure.
It's like bubble wrap.
It is. It's like bubble wrap.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was an interesting
and parfaits
take on that. I think many of us in security have gone through, especially as security professionals. Seemingly, we know better, but have always we strike this balance between, yes, I know it's hard to use PGP, but I'm going to try and use it anyway. But maybe I'm not, because it's like really hard to use, right? And I think it's really also that struggle between security and convenience. Yeah. And then because what he's alluding to privacy as well is that there's a similar struggle between privacy and convenience. I think we interviewed Michael Bazell. He talked about some of the great lengths that he goes through and advises his clients go through to have some anonymity and privacy, but also the inconvenience factors that one can encounter. I know some people like that they spin up a separate email address for everything they sign up for. And there's a lot, we know of these tricks, but oftentimes, even for ourselves, it might be an inconvenience to do some of those things. And we make, I think, every day, us consciously, maybe more so than others, the decisions to protect what we believe is more important. Of course, as that's a parallel to any organization, what's important and what's not is up for debate. When we look at our own OPSEC, which ties into another story, we have to evaluate what's important and still strike that balance between security and convenience. And I think we all know the folks that go to that extreme, and I respect them greatly in protecting their security and privacy, much to the deficit of some of their convenience, and maybe spend more time. Whereas some of us are like, it's a risk decision. Maybe I want to spend more time learning how to build things and do other things than having my own mail server versus using someone else's, right? Now, today, I think largely it's hosted, email. That was one of the debates, I think, between that security and convenience, right, Larry, where I think your company went through this, right, between we're going to host our own email infrastructure because it's more secure, but at a certain point, we're like, wait, how much time are we spending on that? Like,
absolutely. And, I do the same thing. You know what? The joke that, the Cowboys kids always have the worst shoes. Like, same thing. Like, I had a website for hacksthematrix.com and a few other places, and like, shit, I'm just, like, I gotta maintain a server, and I gotta make sure the firewall rules, and I gotta patch it, and I gotta update it. I'm gonna move all that stuff to AWS.
Yeah.
Sure, it cost me like $3 a month, but I was probably paying that in electricity and just time.
Maybe it's 12, but yeah, like I subscribe to a service today that does website monitoring.
Yep.
And pulls keywords. And I'm like, yes, I can totally write a Python script to do this. I'm like, but you know what? I've written those Python scripts quite a few times in the past, and I'm like, it's not really exciting to me, first of all, to go write that, because like it's not exciting because I've done it before.
Yep.
And I'm like, for what I pay for a dedicated instance would be $10 a month, and this service was $7 a month. However, the interesting part is they don't do it as well as I believe I can do it. So now I'm like, you know what? I'm probably going to go off and do it myself. And really, this is just so I can scrape web pages when new items like AMD processors and NVIDIA RTX 30 series come available, because I really want that stuff. And I just want to know. And the email notification is too slow. This is, segues into a whole other conversation of like, why aren't you filtering for bots, because that's a solvable problem, and why aren't you letting like paying customers get first dibs on the stuff when it comes available? And why, when you're going to notify me that something's available, you're sending me an email, and by the time I get to the site, it's too late, it's already gone.
Yep.
I hate that. As a customer, it irks me.
I was thinking before you brought it up, the whole thing about the convenience versus security, whatever that phrase means, what those types of phrases are called. But not to dwell on it, but the whole definition and meaning of words, even convenience doesn't really capture all the nuances that people experience, because it is that. It is the people that would just rather plow through. But I almost wonder if like a term like expediency is not more appropriate, because
efficiency it plays into there too, right?
Or efficiencies, because sometimes you just got to get something done. Sometimes you and usually and very often it's the people that know better that take the shortcuts and do what they do the thing that they know that they shouldn't do. I don't know what you call that, but at the time it seems like the right thing to do. It's a risk. Right. It is.
And it's a business risk decision.
But so remember there was a brilliant engineer. Remember Brandon? And he would poke fun. I don't know, he was friends with Twitchy back in the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Brandon was brilliant. Brilliant enough that he could run Gen 2 on his laptop, compile the kernel, and do it. I'm like, dude, props to you. And he poked fun at me because like I ran a Mac. But this is the same conversation we're having now. I'm like, I don't know that I want to spend that much time with Gen 2 on my laptop.
Right.
I got other things that I want to do. And
exactly.
And to your point, Jeff, that's not necessarily convenience. That's more of a time management kind of thing as well, which plays into it. So
it's like I haven't mowed my lawn in like 7 years because we have Lawn Guy to come do that.
Yeah.
Because I think
you
about
make those decisions.
What it costs me in time to mow the lawn versus not being able to do those other things because I have to mow the lawn. And it's just me that mows the lawn, and by the time I'm done, it's like 6 hours.
Right. Now,
but the lawn guy comes in for like $150 with 3 guys and does all of it. And you know what? While he's doing that, I'm doing this other thing that I really needed to do.
And what's ironic today is I run Ubuntu on all my systems, so there's that.
Hey,
it is not Gen 2.
No, it's not.
But I think, if I may, I think the nuance that we don't often talk enough about is because we have these illustrations, we have these analogies, but I think the conclusion that we always draw to is you should know you should have known better, you shouldn't do that, at least from the one perspective. But I think the thing that we should talk, and we don't have to do it in the news segment, but it'd be an interesting conversation to have sometime, is given that that's more or less a reality, that for expediency's sake, for economic reasons, whatever it is, that's the way it's going to be. Then how do you do security, and what do you do given that circumstance to still try to maintain a secure environment? Mm-hmm. Because it's my whole idea that vulnerabilities are here to stay. What else in the risk equation is something that we could focus on and dwell on, and maybe gain some traction and have some perception of we're secure.
Tyler?
I think the problem is it comes down to what is our real risk, does it really matter? Like, you start to think about how, like, the email server is a great example, like how much visibility. There's a paradigm shift there where Google has all these resources that they're devoting people looking at it and doing security things better than you would be able to do.
Yep.
They have more manpower, more money. So take that and shift to where Jeff's at. Like, okay, so say we do move there, what are the things that we can control? And then what do we actually give up by moving to that? Which there is always a trade-off there. I don't care what platform you're on, you are losing privacy. But at the end of the day, what is your threat? What is your threat factor? What is your business risk from a personal standpoint? And can you really do anything about it from, the things that are going on today, like nation state? You're not going to stop a nation state. I don't care who you are. Privacy from telemetry data or ad tracking data. I don't care how vigilant you are. Like, if you have a cell phone, if you have a product with inside any kind of modern technology in your house, or your family does, you're tracked and you're very well known to these companies. So that goes back to, what is the point of not having these tailored ads that, may be relevant to what you are looking at? Like, is there a point? What is the business risk? What's the trade-off?
Well,
and then how does that paradigm shift happen?
Oculus is an interesting example in the context of what you're saying, Tyler, right? Because there are some security professionals that have put out on public forums that I won't use an Oculus because I don't want to give up my data. I don't want Facebook to know what games I'm playing. I'm like, really? Because, like,
do you care?
First, do
they not already know?
Yeah, and secondly, like, someone already knows what games you're playing, right? Like,
I mean, do you have an iPhone or an Android phone? Is Siri on? And if you have it disabled, do you really think that Siri's not listening, capturing the gaming talk that you're talking about? So at the end of the day, like, it comes down to how much you actually know about what's being tracked and where it's being tracked from, and whether or not you care if it's being used in that manner.
after the whole Parler thing, there were some folks that were fielding questions and were like, I don't want to use Amazon, and I want to go to any site that's hosted on Amazon, and I don't want to use any Apple or Google product. And it's like, well, you better be really good with Linux. And then even at that, think about, I said it in a previous show this week, I'm like, every time I run an APT update, I'm like, oh, look at all that crap coming down. Like, I wonder if that's trustworthy, right? At the end of the day, you're going to trust someone
somewhere.
Someone else somewhere. But getting out of the Apple and Google is hard. There was another tech journalist that was like, well, I just blocked all AWS. Like, anything was on AWS, I blocked it. And they're like, that really sucked. I had to turn it back on, right?
That's like, you're looking at almost 85% of the market of what we use commercially is on some cloud service, whether it's AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or Azure.
Yep.
It's going to be on one of those. There's nothing you can do about that. And on top of that, those aren't really the ones I'd be worried about. Honestly, the ad tracking stuff for your cell phone and Siri and the sites that you're visiting, regardless of where you think you are, you're probing wireless networks. You got Bluetooth on. Every time you pass things, every time your wife says something or you mention something in the house, Siri picks it up, Alexa picks it up. Like, literally, we're in an age where privacy in and of itself, in the form that we thought of privacy 5 years ago, does not exist.
Nope. I feel like, I don't have any data to back this up. My wife and I both feel this way, that we trust Amazon and the Alexa platform way less than Google. I don't know if there's any science behind that.
Is that.
I don't know, but I just feel creeped out as to all the things that Amazon is doing with the Alexa platform and some of the products that I think that they've said they're adding to it. Granted, you have some control. I don't even like to have the calling feature on there, even though I turned it off when we had those devices, and almost 100% I've decommissioned all of those devices. I feel creeped out as to the features and functionality they're putting in there. So we went to Google because I'm like, well, I've got a Pixel, so I use a Google phone. So I'm like, if I have Google devices, like, I'm not at any much more risk, I think, than not using that stuff. I don't know.
I mean, those are psychological. Like, you take enough of those psychological gut reactions, what we call intuition, and those are just basically machine learning of little correlated pieces of data that we have not yet drawn a conclusion to. And there's an entire field of study on this that's fascinating. But there are reasons behind some of those intuitions around different companies and platforms, and most of them are fairly correct. You are trading one evil for another evil. Who owns what and what they do with it. It's capitalism at the end of the day. They're all there to make money. They're
like,
all
I won't
going
use
to
the
utilize you to do it.
Facebook has is it an assistant? What is Facebook's assistant called? I don't remember now, because I'd never use it because I don't trust Facebook at all. But yet I use Facebook, so.
Yep.
They have
and that's the thing is, even if you were to try and, like, be more privacy concentric, right? The fact that you have signed up for these at one point in time, or the EULA has changed and you've agreed to someone's EULA, whether it's your computer, your laptop, your mouse, your webcam, like, all of these things have an EULA that are collecting data. Like, you have these accounts and that data is pretty well known. Your lifestyle doesn't change all that much from what matters to you. So you can't retroactively go back and remove your data very easily. So it comes back to not having been privacy concentric from the beginning of time. Does it actually matter what you're doing now? If you flip 180 degrees, hop off all the platforms, do a remove request through GDRP or one of the other mechanisms, that data and what's known about you, it's still there.
I think we can still draw lines, though. We have rules in the house that my wife and I have collectively established, that there will be no video camera systems in anyone's bedroom or anyone's bathroom. And this ties into one of your stories, Larry, that I did read as well. I just think that's a good practice. I mean,
you're basically pulling in your core center of trust. You've had to go all the way down to bathrooms and personal space bedrooms.
Right.
Like, literally, that's probably about what we control, even at our house level. Like, sidewalks, your neighbor's ring, the Wi-Fi that bleeds over. Like, you're literally probably confined down to concentric ring of
cameras today.
trust.
I mean, you can't put a camera. I went with your recommendation, right? I got the Rio Link, and I put those in the front of my house, and like told my neighbors, I'm like, I'm sorry. I mean, I put a camera, and like I can see your house as clear as day. Like I showed them the camera, and they're like, actually, that's a good thing, because if there's ever an issue, like we know there's coverage. And I'm like, I did that for our safety, and hey, if you ever need the footage, if something happens, I'm happy to share it with law enforcement and help out.
That's another trade-off, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Like you have a security and you have certain conveniences and protections that these technologies are providing at the cost of maybe a little bit of privacy. But
yeah, I'm like, please don't stand naked don't stand naked in the front of your house. I think that should go without saying. Right?
Unless they're exhibitionists, and then then
That's what the backyard is for.
That's what the backyard's for. Can't see in your backyard, don't wanna. But there was a story. ADT was a basically insider threat, and that person was. They called it hacking. I don't. Was it really? Was it password?
Well, so there was the insider threat, and then there was a bunch of other ones that found that there was other stuff that they could do.
But it was like a ridiculously long time that this employee had basically been accessing cameras, but apparently these cameras were in people's bedrooms. Again, goes back to our rule, like no camera technology whatsoever in anyone's bedrooms or bathrooms is the rule. But apparently other people obviously knowingly had ADT install this in their homes. Is that a thing? I don't know.
I mean,
apparently, if you want to like watch your kids, right? And it's
like
just like
cam
you get
type.
you get like 5 camera bundle. Like we want to watch our safe in the bedroom or the guns or the jewelry. Like I guess maybe, I don't know. That seems a little odd to me, but
right. But apparently this person was accessing the camera footage in people's bedrooms and like basically watching them have sex in the bedrooms.
I'm curious why we don't have least privilege. Like this goes back to like this is a well-established company that like should know better, should have retroactively, if nothing else, like known to have granular controls around certain areas that are private. Like why would ADT in any situation need to be able to view live streams unless it's an alert goes off? Like there should be controls there. If alert goes off, trigger camera that allows one-time seated access through a credential proxy that grants access to this console at this time. Like that seems like a pretty straightforward programming mechanism and reassuring security control. Why is that not a thing?
So the employee facing up to 5 years in federal prison, accessing roughly 200 accounts more than 9,600 times over a 4.5 year period. To your point, Tyler, why didn't that throw up any bells, alarms, or whistles before 9,600 times, right?
Yep.
Like, he really needs to be challenged at work, and I don't know what he's doing because that seems like a lot of time.
Yeah, like 4.5 years. Like, what's the math on that? Like, how many times he was looking at these people's cameras? It doesn't say how long, but accessed them 9,600 times in a 4.5 year period.
That's a lot of spank revision right
there. That's a lot of like sitting there and looking at other people's cameras. Like, what else were you doing for those 4.5 years?
And how do you do that in an office space? Like, he was probably doing it after hours. To each other?
He's probably doing it after hours at night from the privacy of his own home. With all the
I go back to like
with all the socks and bourbon, right? Yeah, so the ones that I had on the ADT stuff
you had a different one. I had the one that they linked to this one that was the former ADT employee, but you had a different...
some technical ones. Specifically, if you knew the MAC address of the camera, the MAC address was used to authenticate to ADT's cloud service. If a password was set up on the camera, that was fine because the cloud service would respond back even if you used the wrong credentials. It was still largely from what I'm reading, it was still basically largely based on the MAC address. To the point that if you put in the wrong password, it would respond back with the correct one. So then you could get the real one. Yeah.
Interesting.
They've had this problem before though.
Yeah.
Like, and they're not the only security or like camera company that does it this way. In fact, small access points, most IoT devices, there's a lot that use like libraries that are dedicated to doing it this way.
Yep. Shared libraries.
Well, because they don't want to deal with the support, basically.
Right.
What I'm getting from all this is that I should wrap my cameras in bubble wrap.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that would work.
I mean,
It would be blurry.
According to that article,
It'd be like trying to watch porn in the 90s when it
You
was
didn't
the channel
actually
you had
have
to pay
porn?
for, and it was kind of like that blurry.
Yep, and you had to like.
Sometimes you could see.
Yep, sometimes.
Imagination.
Boobs.
I think it was a boob. That was a boob.
Or was that just wavy lines? I don't know. Yeah. The other one was that the RTSP server on the cameras was unauthenticated.
Oh.
So if you're on the same network, you can just connect to the RTSP server.
Wait, what?
Yeah. The RTSP
Again.
server on the cameras were unauthenticated.
And so anyone that knows how to use VLC
Yeah.
could stream the footage from your camera.
Yep. Yep.
In a quick Google search,
Heaven,
will tell
heaven
you how to do
forbid you
that.
got a bad wireless password, or a guest network, or
Mm-hmm.
WEP, or WPS.
Yep. Next.
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 I don't.
Sudo.
Sudo.
Oh,
I
yeah.
figured that'd be the big one.
The Baron Samedit.
Is it
Baron
sudo
Samit.
or sudo?
Make me a sandwich.
It's sudo.
Pseudo.
Sudo.
I thought it was sudo. I thought it was sudo because it was super user do.
I guess either is acceptable. And we've had these debates about
Studio.
demon, whatever.
Studio.
Studio.
No.
So I fell on my dirt bike and lost a bunch of skin on my arm, and I've been putting this cream on it. Yeah, it's called Pseudo Cream, and I've always thought a great marketing slogan would be moisturizing at a higher privilege, but like only people like us would get it. But it does work really well. I mean, they're not a sponsor of the show, but props to Pseudo Cream. You can use that slogan with the nerds.
Oh, by the way, inappropriate.
That was inappropriate. Yes.
No. It all depends on where you're moisturizing.
Where you're moist.
And
it
how
was
often.
my arm where I. Yes.
Yeah, it was with your arm. Yep. Mm-hmm. I swear, officer, I was just cleaning it and it went off.
That was inappropriate.
So we need to either replace or supplement the lube in the studio with a
Pseudo Cream.
jerry can of pseudo cream.
Yes.
There you go.
We're just filling time because I'll be honest with you. I tried to read the technical description of this at least 3 times, and I'm like, I have to read it again and really, really pay attention to this. I don't know if anyone else tried to get to the crux of the issue. This was props to the person who discovered it, which I apologize, I don't know their name in front of me at the moment, but really, really awesome. I linked to an exploit. Oh, well, the exploit alert. It's a pretty good site, by the way. Links to it was Qualys that found it, and also I meant to look up what the reference was to Baron Samedit. What is that? Is that the person that found it, or is that a reference to something else?
That's the name.
That's the name of that they gave to this vulnerability, and it was found by Qualys. I suppose since Qualys is a sponsor, I should have reached out to them and will after this, but didn't have time to fully dig into this one like I should have. But basically, the high level, what I did get was any local user can exploit this, and it was introduced in July of 2011 and affects all legacy versions up to that point. They tested and were able to obtain full root privileges on Ubuntu 20.04 and Debian 10 and Fedora 33, and likely other operating systems are vulnerable. I updated Raspberry Pi today, and the only package that it updated, because I had updated previously not that long ago, was sudo.
So Baron Samedi, not Baron Samedit, is a spirit of Haitian voodoo, as the spirit of the dead.
Interesting.
I kind of this reminded me of what was the Bash shell vulnerability a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
shell shock.
Yep.
We've been using Bash forever. Hackers love it. It's great. And then 20 years later, you find out it's got a bug in it. And then here's sudo, which we've been telling our customers to use and rely on for how many years, and it's got a 10-year-old vulnerability in it. And I have two thoughts. One is, okay, we all suck, because why didn't we all know about this? But two, that's my initial knee-jerk reaction. Two is, given that this kind of stuff is out there and is going to continue to periodically bubble wrap up,
Nice.
Vulnerabilities are here to stay. What else can we do about it? Because this kind of stuff is going to happen. And I've not read the technical details either, but I assume they didn't announce it until there was a fix for it.
That's correct. They actually gave props to the open source team,
For coming up with
Todd
one.
Miller, for the response to this, and was fixed quickly.
So what will be interesting is, it's devastating in terms of what it can do, and anybody can do it, and the fix is available. So let's, fast forward to 6 or 9 months or a year from now, where we're going to be talking a news story about some major company getting popped, and it turns out they hadn't patched their sudo.
Yep.
Right. Well, and it was fixed in 6 days. So they sent the advisory on 113. The advisory and patches were sent on 119, and coordinated release happened on January 26th.
Well, and actually, out of curiosity, does anybody know what the fix? Not the details of the fix, but how do you install it? Because this is
Apt-get, update, apt-get, upgrade.
Yeah.
you have to update the whole OS.
No, you just run the package updater, and it updates the sudo package for your
Whatever
Linux
is affected,
Yeah.
whatever the library is, and whatever it uses.
The patch for the sudo code, comes down in that fix for the distribution. Yeah.
So it's not. So it's something that you got to go do. It's not going to be something, I guess.
And you have to
presumably
sudo
newer versions.
Actually, you have to sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get upgrade.
Oh, so anybody can do
All
it.
depends on who you're logged in as.
That's right, unless you're logged in as root. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Just a staggering amount of research, by the way. And I haven't digested all the technical details, but it kind of begs the question. And again, why I didn't think of it earlier to reach out to DeCloss for comment on this. Like, what got you on this whole thing of because this is a really nuanced. This isn't like a
That's what I wanna
easily
know. What were they
understand,
looking
like
at?
a couple of things, like, hey, you can get root if you do like X, Y, and Z. Like some of the container breakouts, shell shock, for example, and some of the other vulnerabilities that are privilege escalation on Linux are like, oh, like I can digest that. Like I've used Unix and Linux for a while. I get this is like they're deep in the source code and going through multiple steps. So how did you find that and realize you were latching onto something that required that level of investigation? You kind of had this intuition that you were onto a privilege escalation exploit. Pretty good work.
See, I wonder if they were looking at something that was in the wild, honestly.
Yeah.
Because looking at how deep they're digging here, and they're doing ASLR bypasses with memory overriding of environment variables, with character return, strings that are very, very, very specific to a certain buffer length. This is super deep from an analysis standpoint. Usually you see this analysis when you are reversing something and going backwards. Going forward with exploit dev and how they're developing this and what they found, that makes me wonder if they were looking at something that was outside of this or trying to figure out what something else was doing in the wild.
Right.
And this is kind of a means to an end because, you said, this is in the weeds.
You wouldn't normally in systems troubleshooting be digging this deep into sudo. This wasn't someone that was like, oh, there's a bug in sudo. Maybe I'll dig into the source code. This is oddly specific, Tyler, to your point.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what comes out of some of the kind of hypervisor level things that can happen, because a lot of those are going to be the ones the images that are the gold images for, maybe lower end cloud providers or things that are being auto deployed. Those are the things that aren't going to get updated as quickly. And those are the things that may have multi-tenant shared access that if you were to be able to elevate and break out of something and leverage something like this, that's going to provide a lot of access to a lot more sensitive hardware. So I think if this is the case, there may be a lot more that this ends up providing attackers.
Well, and I'm reading through it as we're talking, and I certainly haven't digested all of it, but they're talking about the things that were particular about the code that created the vulnerability. And I assume that lots of people are now looking for this type of vulnerable condition, this type of code peculiarity in all the other utilities and
millions of lines of code
functions in Linux. And this is Linux. Does anybody still run any Unix variants and sudo's out there? And
it's interesting. This would be in is sudo come from the GNU project? Like, is it a GNU utility? I haven't. It's interesting. It is really kind of interesting and telling that we used some of these utilities all the time without fully understanding their origins, who maintains them, how they're maintained, where they come from. We know we use sudo to gain higher privileges on Linux and Unix systems. But where did it come from?
I don't know, but I mean, it's been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long it's been around, but SU was probably there first. And
yes,
I
SU was a standard.
SU is definitely a
POSIX that came from Unix, and like POSIX standard build into Unix.
And I'm guessing here, but it's an educated guess that sudo largely came about as an alternative to setuid. Maybe not that as much as the realization that all administrators shouldn't be running around doing everything as root.
I mean, there's another good RCE that came out too, the Oracle one, WebLogic, which I think has a lot bigger external presence for exploitation that has a lot of pretty juicy data. So that one's going to be interesting as well.
Just a little history on sudo. Robert Coggenshaw and Cliff Spencer wrote the original subsystem in 1980.
1980, so that's Unix.
Yeah, that was Unix. The code features were modified by the IT staff at the University of Colorado Boulder and the College of Engineering and Applied Science, including Todd C. Miller. The current version has been publicly maintained by OpenBSD developer Todd C. Miller since 1994 and is the person that they contacted to implement the fix, and has been distributed under the ISC style license since 1999.
It's crazy.
Crazy.
How do you have time to do that? Maintain the main thing that keeps Linux and Unix systems safe.
Yeah.
For that long.
I feel ashamed being a nerd in Unix and Linux for that long and not understanding the history around commands that we know and love. Interesting. Anyway, sorry. Next.
Emotet
was taken down until it comes back. That's what I'm finding with these big botnets and malware is that you take them down and they come back.
Well, I mean, they say they come back, but so the Emotet takedown was fantastic. There was the video in Ukrainian that from the Ukrainian police and so forth, and show the takedown, and the environment was typical Russian bloc, Soviet bloc style apartment that was a dump and trash, and I fully expected when they pan over the desk where the computer was to see an ashtray overflowing with someone who'd been chain smoking cigarettes for a month. And
now give the Ukrainians a break, man. They've had a tough go at it for a really long time.
They have. But running Windows 7. These guys made millions from the ransomware from Emotet and all the subsequent shenanigans running Windows 7 and
the developer or botnet herder.
If it's not broken, man,
don't fix it.
Yeah, right.
Don't mess with it.
Yep.
So it is interesting how they did the takedown too. The coordinated. This is almost scary, and I'm for all the good that this is doing, and I do agree with them handling it. It's becoming a little bit of a concern that if you don't fall within lines of whoever your overlords are, and maybe you just live on AWS servers, look at Parler, But these coordinated takedowns of infrastructure and or DNS sinkholing, where they just take over your DNS, like, well, how do you protect that from, like, if you thinking from the evil side as a criminal, how would you protect that? But thinking from a commercial side, like, I don't really trust any of these guys, and if I fall outside of what they think is appropriate, given politics change and climate changes and countries change, how do I protect myself so that they can't take that kind of stuff down just at, whatever they feel is necessary? Like, I broke Microsoft's EULA, so now international takedown. Like, how do you not do that?
It's a great question. Yeah, somebody interesting to ask would be somebody like Dave Kennedy, perhaps, because apparently Binary Defense was critical,
assisting in the
takedown of Emotet.
Oh, you mean we had an excuse to bring our friend Dave on the show?
I know.
Missed it? Well, we still have that excuse. We can still bring Dave.
I didn't find that out until this afternoon.
Yeah.
But you say coming back. Apparently, the command and control servers were in the Netherlands, and law enforcement officials in the Netherlands are in the process of using those command and control systems to send an update to Emotet to self-delete itself. Like, I thought that was totally not cool. Like,
that's kind of illegal too, right?
I thought
like,
so.
You're accessing someone else's system.
Yeah.
But if it's done, well, it's interesting. What begs the question?
You look at the legal end.
The legal end is interesting because it's not just illegal in the United States, right? You legal precedents in other countries.
Right.
How does that converge together to ultimately be legal across the board? That's a really international law is really interesting in this case. Yeah.
Yep. So,
well, interesting, and also interesting how it applies to this case, I should say.
Yeah.
So the internet used to be your own servers, right? Like, you used to be able to have the internet and like connect in. Like, can you still run your own stuff and be safe now?
Well, if you're violating laws,
not if you use sudo.
If you use sudo, or if you're violating laws in all of these countries collectively, you're likely going to be a target for law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But does the internet apply legally now, like with borders? Like, this comes back to like that old philosophy of like the internet was kind of its own thing. Now, are we starting to apply individual countries of where the hardware's at, where the virtual, people accessing these servers? Like, I think there's some interesting like theological things that has to get sorted out, and who controls and mitigates that. Like, when we start to have commercial companies handling, like Microsoft saying, yeah, we'll facilitate that, and we'll just, we'll sinkhole everything, and we can handle that DNS. Like, we're the name masters, so we can do that. Is that how the internet was designed to work? And like, are we past that point of like the internet is now what it used to be?
Yeah, deep questions. Story number 13, like crypto tools like Signal and Bitcoin, like, do they harm democracy? Do they help it? I mean, this is we're down a rabbit hole now of the most recent example is Parler. Maybe even more recent is Nmap, which was taken down because it was deemed bad by Google's what is their browser thing, the wrongful blocking of Nmap, which I thought was interesting and plays into this conversation, and not as much of a deeper philosophical level as Tyler wants to take us, which I don't mind going there, by the way. But with Nmap,
it just makes your brain hurt.
It does. But with Nmap, it's kind of interesting. Like, Fyodor was in a place where personally I've been as well. Right, your stuff's taken down. You've got a day full of meetings and recordings and like stuff to do, so you can make your living. But in the meantime, some big company has taken your stuff down erroneously. They don't know that. The big company doesn't know that, but you know that. All your users know that because they're like, hey, I can't.
Big company's automation did what it was supposed to.
Can't get to your podcast, can't get to the Nmap's great open source project. And Fyodor is the shining example of an upstanding citizen in our community and has done a great thing without question. And so Fyodor's like, you know what? I'm just going to tweet it out. Like, this happened and it shouldn't have happened. And hopefully someone on Google security team who did see it uses Nmap and or listens to the Security Weekly Network and goes, oh shit, our automation, and it didn't mean to do that, and so we'll unblock you. My issue with that is not everyone has a Twitter account in the ear of the security community, maybe we do,
millions of followers,
like maybe Fyodor does, right? To go, yeah, that's how we're going to solve the problem. Because going through official channels, I mean, you're stuck in a rat hole and rabbit hole for God knows how long, but that there's other smaller projects that deserve the same level of response from the bigger companies to go, oh crap, we shouldn't have blocked that, right? But they're trying to go through official channels, and believe me, I've gone through the official channels and the non-official channels. The non-official channels are way more effective if you can get someone that's on one of these security teams that goes, oh yeah, we know Nmap, we know Security Weekly, so we'll unblock your stuff because you're good citizens. But I want everyone to have that same level of response to go, you're the XYZ person, like your project is legitimate, it shouldn't have gotten blocked.
Well, the problem is that everybody will, the official channels are that method because everyone's going to have some beef. Why'd you take
everyone that gets taken down is like, why'd you take it down?
Why'd you take my stuff down? Because clearly you violated the rules, but I didn't violate the rules. You're infringing on my speech.
Well, the rules are but not every case, but there are a lot of cases where I've been where I'm like, wait, what are the rules? And why?
For sure.
Why was I taken down? And you haven't told me why. So what are the rules? Does that mean you can just turn people? And
who dictates that?
But they dictate that because they're a private company, and people have really misused the whole free speech thing. Like, they're a private company, and they can decide to remove you from the platform. Because if you read the EULA, the EULA gives them all the control in the world to basically take you down for whatever reason. Like, they can be like, they define what inappropriate is, in other words.
Right.
But
So
do you have the access to do that otherwise now? Like, do you have the ability to have your own server, your own hardware on an OS that is acceptable use to connect to an internet provider that provides you internet connection only, that would allow that's not going to take you down, that goes to a DNS that's also not bought out or owned?
Political affiliation aside, I think many of us, like myself, have put ourselves in the shoes of Parler to go, wait, what if the big companies have decided that whatever I'm doing is inappropriate for whatever reason? Again, political stuff aside, what if I come to well, hold on, what would Tyler, to your point, I got to find an ISP that's not going to kick me off. I got to find a registrar that's not going to kick me off. And I got to find some place to host my servers somewhere to provide DNS and basic infrastructure that people can't kick me off, right? And
isn't also relying on one of these people that just kicked you off. That's their largest customer. Keep going.
I think we go to that Eastern Bloc building somewhere with the Windows 7 system with an ashtray with a bunch of cigarettes. I think that's where Parler's ending up, is maybe in that building right next door.
Well, if you check Parler's DNS currently, it's in Russia.
It's in Russia.
I mean, and that's political discussions aside, I think that was one of the things that many people missed about that whole Parler thing, that Amazon did have a right to tell them to go away, because it's the same thing with the First Amendment rights. You can say anything you want.
Yeah, but you can't yell fire in a movie theater.
Right. You can say anything you want, but there are consequences. For saying
there's still laws.
Right. Yelling fire in a movie theater, and you cause damage and you cause people to die because of the stampede, then you now have to pay the consequences for what you said.
Sure.
Also, if you come in my house and start spouting language that I don't like, you have every right to say that. But it's my goddamn house. Right. Get out.
But also the First Amendment is for the government not to regulate speech, right? Not to impose on speech. Right. Private companies now that have these platforms, they don't have to abide by the First Amendment in that sense, that you know what I mean? But there's still laws that if you're breaking the law, there's still a responsibility to uphold the laws in this country. And those are
the laws, and
things,
they are private companies, seen as private entities, as private people by the law. And but back to the house analogy, if you come into my house and start spouting
Right.
a nonsense and I don't like it, I can ask you to get out of my house.
Yeah, but kind of similar to
But
Amazon.
they control fundamental
dude,
technologies, though, right?
You gotta
Like
fuck
DNS,
up.
for
But hold
example.
on, you gotta fuck up pretty bad for Amazon to kick you off AWS.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
you
let's just be frank.
And you gotta fuck up pretty bad for me to tell you to get out of my
exactly.
house.
That's what I'm saying. They're kind of similar, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
But
yeah.
if they control something like a DNS, like the root DNS servers, right? Like when companies or ideologically a small sect of people control the fundamental technologies that enable the facilitation of something that is an open collective, like the internet, where we're talking like DNS.
Do they become more scary than the government?
but so
Absolutely.
So
I agree.
I'm finding
you can go back in the archives of Security Weekly and hear me say that. Usually after we've been kicked off of some platform for no good reason.
yeah. Now, see, I find that Tyler, yours with the analogy and that infrastructure, you know, a little bit of a stretch in that Parler was never asked to leave DNS. Parler's DNS was never turned over. Amazon said, "No, get your servers out of my house." Like,
but
their
but
DNS all worked.
take Maribot or Emotet, right? Like
Okay,
take
well,
the bot.
but that's different. That's not Parler, right?
Correct.
But I think Tyler's point is like,
is it?
different. How different is it?
Parler was a platform for people to talk, and maybe the things that they said were bad. Emotet was
a network for people to commit crime, but Parler, there was also
Emotet was
crime
not a network for committing crime. Emotet was the crime. Like,
I mean, it is crime, but is it crime in every country? Like, if you're operating that in a country, if that's, again, I'm not advocating crime or botnets by any means. Like, I want to eliminate all those as much as anybody else. But at the same time, that fundamental, like, when you start to take over something like DNS and Sinkhole and like just, hey, we'll just take their IP space and then take their DNS and black hole it and route all their traffic to us and then take over the botnet. Like, at that point, like, that could be anything, like, given someone thinks that you're breaking the law.
could be.
Yeah, but to do that, you have to have cooperation from law enforcement, and I think it begs a good question, Tyler. Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah,
I think we need some transparency.
Oh, we know what that is.
watching the
I think we
watchers?
do need some transparency to understand what that process looks like when there is an international crime being crime across international
we know.
borders. I don't know the answer, but I have always assumed that when Microsoft does take down a botnet that has crossed international borders, that there is cooperation with law enforcement from all the relevant countries.
They were asked to do it by law enforcement. They just didn't say, "Hey, you know what sounds like a good idea? Let's fuck up Emotet today."
Yeah.
Bonk. No, they
That
were
there is
asked by a whole
But what
bunch
that-
of
but what
coordinated
that-
law enforcement.
I think that would be a super interesting interview to interview people that know the answers to those questions and
Yes.
ask them what that process is like. I'm assuming there is a process in place. I'd be curious to understand what that process is.
It's a subpoena. They broke the EULA, and Microsoft finds a loophole because their lawyers are freaking insanely good, and therefore they can get collaboration across all of the different people that need to be involved.
I love your
fairly
tinfoil. I love your tinfoil
Probably the
hat.
other way around, Tyler,
but it's
but-
not. It's not grounded in complete fiction either, right? Because what if there are certain
I mean,
privileges that larger companies could have and leverage that they have because they are larger companies and do have those teams of lawyers? Can they get stuff taken down more easily than? And does that give them a competitive advantage? There's lots of talk of breaking up bigger companies. Antitrust is a huge thing again, and those of us that have been in technology for over 20 years are very familiar with antitrust as it relates to Microsoft and many other companies. I don't know that that's the answer either. Is to break up. So you've got one Facebook today. Is like having 5 Facebooks really the answer? I don't know if that was the answer in telecom, but it's different. It's different. It's different than breaking up AT&T, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
What's next?
Next.
we could do a whole show on just that.
I wanted to briefly touch on the whole Flash thing because somebody had an article about.
This is so. Let me just set the stage because I can't wait to get everyone's reaction on this one. So was it South African government?
South Africa. That's what
has
it was
this
some other country.
Has this application that is like a form that you fill out, and I forget which what it's for, but we can
Diplomatic immunity?
use
wait.
use your
Wrong
South
movie.
African Revenue Service basically has this form that you fill out, and it was based on Flash. And as we know, Adobe has basically neutered Flash, like they embedded it in the code. 10 months ago, there was like on this date, there's a kill kind of similar to taking down a botnet, right? Like they took down Flash in a very similar manner and said in this date. So the South African government goes, well, rather than paying a developer from Ukraine, perhaps very nominal fees to recreate this form in a modern JavaScript HTML5 application, which really wouldn't cost that much money in my assessment. They said, we're going to take a browser. We're going to use a pirated, is pirated the right term?
Yeah, technically, yeah.
Technically pirated version of Flash embedded in the browser, tune that browser so that it can only access this Flash application, and we're going to distribute it. And this is how you basically go fill out this form with the South African Revenue Service. And this was
South Africa's a bunch of hackers. Like they are some sysadmins.
It's a brilliant hack. I guess maybe.
So on the
brilliant at some level, it is very.
How many sysadmins have done this for their environments? Like
the ones responsible for the railways in China, same thing.
Yeah, it was a similar.
Some of the railways in China used Flash for doing train management and all that type of stuff. So they went and got a pirated copy of Flash and rolled back a little bit, and now the trains run, and they were down for like 16 hours because of this thing.
Right. Yeah, I heard that too, Larry. Yeah, now that you said it.
It was funny. That discussion came up just the other day when it happened in one of the SANS forums or SANS Slack channels, and my comment was, I've done enough pen testing against those critical types of services and looked at the protocols that are used in those systems that Flash is the least of their worries.
This is a problem. Technology refuses to die, and we've speculated this in the past that like Flash is going to refuse to die, and yet here's the evidence.
Yep. Jeff? So here's my problem with it, and it's a personal one. I have this printer next to me that's one of those really cool, scanner fax. Not that anybody faxes anymore. Copier.
Right, Tyler? That's an MFD.
Multifunction device?
Yep. Multifunction device, yes. And the application that I use on my computer, on my laptop, to manage it, mostly for copying stuff, for scanning things, which my family asks me to scan stuff all the time. Turns out I tried to launch it the other day, and I got this weird image pop up. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I'm like, well, I got to reboot the system. Let me try it on my other laptop. Same thing. So I finally it was a Flash-based little app thing. So now I have no way of doing anything with this printer.
No, you can totally find the pirated version of Flash because
that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I haven't looked. But it's out there. I mean, there's going to be use cases like this.
I'll send you one.
Yeah. Jeff, my question is like, how old is this printer?
The
fact that you have to think about it means it's outlived its expected lifetime.
No,
if you have to buy toner or ink for it, time to buy a new one.
I can still get toner and ink for it.
I know you can still get it, but it's probably costs more. The toner or the ink probably costs more than a new printer does right about now.
Absolutely. This was issued to me. I want to say, I suckered some company I worked for into getting it for me. I forget whether it was AT&T.
The fact that you forget.
It's probably 10 years. It's probably 10 years old.
Oh, good God.
But it still works.
I know, dude. That printer has outlived its lifetime by 10 years.
But that's the railway in China. Our systems still work, and they just happen to run Flash.
Yeah.
No excuse for the South African Revenue Service because they should have just updated their app. But now we're talking about a physical device that you have to replace. That's a different thing. But I think the negative is we're going to see this proliferation of people still pirating Flash for these exact use cases, Jeff.
Well, and it's funny. I did a prep call today for Security and Compliance Weekly with Wendy Nather. She's going to be on the show next week, Tuesdays noon Eastern, and we've been bringing her up off and on for I don't know how many episodes, talking about the cybersecurity poverty line, which is what we're going to have her come on and talk about. And so
it's one way to get a guest is to talk about the thing that they invented or an expert in so much that they're just really forced to come on the show to set the record straight and share it, right?
Absolutely. And enlighten us. And one of the things we were talking about in terms of, what kind of rabbit holes are we going to go down was the fact that she mentioned that she works for Cisco now. Cisco apparently, and I met I'll have to message her. Apparently Cisco did some sort of study about companies and how often do they refresh their technology or something like that, or I forget what the details were, but the conclusion was companies that regularly refresh their technology tend to be more secure. It seems like a no-brainer.
Go figure.
But my problem with that was, though, a lot of my PCI customers, and I think, Paul, you've experienced this, because we've talked about, how many point of sale systems, self-checkout systems were running on what's called 4690.
Yeah, 4690 OS. Yeah.
Merchants that are investing God knows how many millions of dollars to put computers to replace what used to be a cash register in thousands of locations across the country, they don't want to do that every 18 months. They kind of want that stuff to last for 10 years.
Yeah. Well, even small companies too, small businesses, the point of sale system, Jeff, as you have experienced, it's very critical to the operations. I mean, so much so there was a new restaurant which has barbecue and brisket, which can't wait to try. But the reviews I was reading was the service was bad, and they mentioned something about them having problems with their point of sale system. It underscores the point of how important those systems are when they make that initial selection. And once they get it working, don't change it, because if they change it, it could mean a huge impact to their business. People don't want to go and eat at that restaurant if they have to wait for an hour for food because they're having some kind of issue with the point of sale system, right? Also, Jeff, to your point, a problem with you've got thousands of stores. Uplifting and upgrading or replacing your point of sale system is a huge undertaking and hugely critical to that business.
Well, it is. I mean, I had a merchant customer that I worked with for many years that was going through the process of, they knew that they were going to need to replace because they're running on XP back when XP was getting ready to go away, and they were planning on the replacement. They knew it was going to take them 3 years to decide. Okay, we're going to replace it, and then to the point where all their stores had the updates. So, it's almost like you have to plan for the next rollout before you've rolled out the one that you're currently trying to roll out.
That was my first job as a programmer, Jeff. I lived through that. We had customers that, before I got there, they had bought systems and then they were looking to upgrade them. And I remember the developer. I mean, it was a huge project to get. Let's get all their products in. Let's get their software ported to the new platform. It was a huge deal back then. Still a huge deal today.
And what's even worse is, I mean, I've had a customer relatively recently within the last year that was working on a payment application that would be running on a smartphone. And they were a typical engineering organization that had it was a 2 or 3 year project for a municipal transit authority. Handheld device to collect tickets and purchases on trains, and they had designed this thing for a Samsung S4 or something like that. And when I was working with them, in the last year, I'm like, PCI's got this thing about unsupported operating systems, and this thing was versions old, and they hadn't even fielded it yet, and trying to figure out how to reasonably satisfy the unsupported operating system issue within PCI in a smartphone where those things really are like everything else end of life 12 to 18 months, but with smartphones they stop supporting them a whole lot quicker than Windows operating systems, which get super double extended extra life support for God knows how long type of thing. It's a real problem. In fact, and not to bore you guys to tears, but the PCI Council every year they solicit what should we create a special interest group to dig into what's a nagging problem topic that keeps coming up. They just happened to announce today that they're going to tackle is I guess in 2021 the whole issue of unsupported operating systems. And I haven't read the details. I just saw the headline, but I would wager that a lot of it's because so much of the payment industry and payment applications are moving to things like smartphones that you don't get 10 years of support
Yeah.
with the operating systems and the component parts. You get maybe 3 years. If you're lucky.
It's a dicey technology decision. And I mean, when I think about if you were running an older smartphone, older Android version for a very special purpose application, I wouldn't be so much concerned about like rogue apps, because I'm sure you could prevent people from installing new apps on the phone because it's a very special purpose. I'd be more concerned with the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi drivers that you can't update being an attack vector in that particular scenario.
Right. But, on the flip side, as I'm experiencing it right now, I'm like, why the frick do I have to replace a printer? Because I can't run the tool that runs the printer. There's nothing wrong with the printer.
Right.
It does all the things that and I don't use it that often. It's used more by the family, but it's becoming a dead weight now.
Yep.
Because the supporting application I can no longer run because it was written in Flash.
Similar thing not that long ago, Jeff, in that I had a printer. I'd had it for I don't know how many years. I'd had it since I started consulting, and in fact, it worked so well that I bought one for my mom. And
so it was dot matrix.
Yeah, pretty close.
Or it was the old IBM. What did they call them with the paper that was
Yeah,
a plotter. It's like a plotter.
The line feed.
Plotter.
Yep. The daisy wheel printers and same thing. The printer new Mac, new updated version of Mac OS, no drivers available for the printer. Couldn't print to it. Couldn't scan. Nothing. I'm like, all right, it's time to buy a new printer. But I think I got 7 years out of the printer, and like the cartridges for the inkjet were becoming ridiculously expensive. I looked at like what it was going to cost for me to get the next set of cartridges for it, and it was as expensive to get those cartridges as it was for me to buy a brand new HP laser printer that did all of the same things.
And what I do is when I buy a printer, I buy one spare cartridge with it. And then, like you said, Larry, once you have no more cartridges left, as little as
time
we
to
print,
get a new printer.
time to get a new printer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And for that printer, we were going through cartridges like every 3 months. I've had this printer.
Shouldn't you be able to refill the cartridges, though, Tyler? I think you lived that, right?
Oh yeah, you can refill cartridges.
You just got to learn how to hack the firmware on the.
It's so easy. It's scary.
Yeah.
And the reset methods are just dumb. And the really expensive ones that they charge you, thousands of dollars for these cartridges, literally have like low near field chips on them that just get flashed with an ID number of the count, and that's basically it. So you put some toner in there and flash it, and it's good to go.
Interesting.
Gotta love it.
How about Microsoft's VS Code?
Yeah.
Oh,
that one was fascinating.
Fascinating because there was all this fancy stuff in this article, and then I'm like, how is this person? Where is this in my list now?
I want to say it was towards the bottom.
The way he disclosed it too was just perfect. Like, does a commit with comments telling him not to delete this and to contact Microsoft's bug bounty team and response team. And it fell all within their safe harbor and responsible disclosure policies. And he was awarded a cash prize. Like, the dude literally commit code to the release branch of Visual Studio Code.
Crazy.
Because of an authentication token.
23, Paul.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, you read this article, and there's a lot of really cool technical stuff, and you're like, wow, that's really slick. But I'm like, the whole time you're reading, I'm like, but how did he like get code in the repository? And then you read the line towards the middle end of the article, and it's like, well, the actions checkout was executed in the step before the vulnerable workflow file is used. There was a GitHub token with write permissions in the repository, and that was the real. Had that token not been there, he wouldn't have been able to inject it or do anything with this. It would have just been a theoretical attack. Like, if I were to be able to get the token to be able to commit to this repository, I could pull off a really cool hack. But that was really the vulnerability in my mind.
Well, so the token was given out of order, so you could get a token as part of the workflow process. And so he basically set up the push, and as part of the process that happened for their CIDC pipeline and their workflow, that was out of order. So he was able to get a token as part of the workflow process, and then from there he had the push set already, and he was able to push that commit up to VS Code. And so it was basically if I remember right, there was an issue with the regex and one of the closing brackets, and then how or when the token within inside of the workflow of the push actually happened. That was not there was a workflow flaw.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So it was a CI/CD pipeline / business process failure.
Yeah.
Or logic failure,
failure,
probably
yeah.
is a better way to,
Well, a logic failure and a vulnerability. There was a command injection vulnerability, but like
In the
getting
code,
to that was the more interesting part. Was getting to that, being able to execute the actual execution.
And then how he reported it. Like I thought that reporting, like in the commit comments, was just like that's pretty ballsy for one. And he was very careful about doing it legally with inside of their bug reporting. But there was no arrogance. It was just, here's the problem. Here's what I did. Contact me here and let's work it out. Like,
it was so slick, like they couldn't be mad at him. Basically,
no, yeah,
and it was responsibly disclosed.
It was, and it's an undisclosed amount, which usually means it's a higher dollar amount.
Interesting. But he deserves it. I thought it was a very ingenious.
It's clever.
Yep, and a lot of work was put into that, so he deserves it for sure.
So,
and glad that he disclosed it, right, rather than someone infecting the supply chain in VS Code, where everyone writes their code, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. That was that falls right within inside of how we've seen these supply chain attacks and how we've been talking about these supply chain attacks happening. This could have been a library, right? They could be doing a commit to one of the libraries that's shared across multiple software platforms. So it wouldn't be like SolarWinds. It would be like all of the code that utilizes a library that could be well beyond what SolarWinds is.
Yeah, it could. You're right. This could have been way worse. You could have injected yourself into other people's CI/CD pipelines and code repositories and software. Oh,
it would have been.
I'm glad he disclosed that. Yeah.
Are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Larry's number 6, the Google announcement about
that's a good one, Jeff.
the targeting of security research.
We kind of started on this. Yeah, we started on this and didn't come back to it.
Let's. That was the other one that I figured would be an interesting topic for the segment. And
this, I mean, I think attackers trying to get in the supply chain of vulnerability research, right?
Yep. Like for me, this was very much hey man, I'm a security researcher and I've got this thing I'm struggling with. Hey, can I send you a project? Maybe you can help me with it? Because like I'm so close to O-Day. Oh yeah, sure, totally. I open up the project and within the project is code you compile, which is the O-Day, which compromises the system of the attacker.
I mean, on the attacker's part, it's pretty slick, right? Like if I'm after the exploit code, I'm gonna target the people who are looking for 0 days and developing exploit code. And I'm going to try and get in their system, software, and processes, and I want to get what they have, right? I mean, essentially, it's what it boils down to.
Yep.
So what's stopping them from targeting pen testers now, or pen test companies? Like we've been saying that for decades, I think. Like if I wanted to go, if I was an evil bad guy, I would be going after the people that are already breaking in and already have access that may not have good computer or sanitizing practices where hashes live on there, the whole attack plan, like reports for all the companies, how you got in, how you got to all the keys, like those things would be super useful attacking pen test companies or good security companies, right? So I think this just shows we have to be vigilant.
Optimistically, I like to think that some of that data is stale and not as useful because once it's reported, they're fixing it. And laughter now can ensue.
Wow.
What I thought was interesting.
You're new around here, aren't you? Damn. Must be nice to be the new guy and not jaded.
Talk about overly optimistic.
All the chatter I saw about this, because I saw a drop on Twitter whenever it came out a couple of days ago, and people going on and on about it. It's like, well, that's funny, because where I often hear the term security breacher is all the people are like, they're misusing the term hacker. We need to protect hacker rights because we're really security researchers. Like, okay, so they're targeting hackers. Hackers are targeting hackers.
Well, I've
And-
always thought that way with vulnerability data too. I'm like, well, but like by the time you gain access to it, hopefully someone's fixed those vulnerabilities. But as we all know, that's not true either. Damn it.
Yeah. It was a novel way of like the pre-build configuration files for like when you compile something. Like we use these all the time, and sometimes they get rather complex. Like, you know, drop this binary in this folder that then is generated another piece of code that's then generating documents from that are infected. Like those post-build and pre-build routines for Visual Studio or, you know, whatever compiling software you're using. Those can get pretty complex. So how often are you checking those pre and post build routines as part of your projects?
Well, it's interesting. It goes back to our previous segment with Dan about automating our workflow. When you're a developer, you're automating your workflow as much as possible. And oftentimes, I've been guilty of this too. I set up a workflow automation to be like, hey, when I build this project in PyCharm, for example, like JetBrains tools, which played into some of the other attacks, their source code manager, what's it called? That came up in SolarWinds too, I think. Well, I forget what that was called. But in any case, it's, you know, hey, I gotta do this task when I do development over and over and over again. And you know what? I want to automate it. And inside of this task, like basically in my IDE, I'm like, every time I want to click the build button, I want to go execute this script. And it sounds like the attackers can inject something into those scripts that, like, every time I'm building my software, they're getting a copy of it. At least if I was the attacker, that's the kind of thing that I would go after, is to get into the exploit developers build process, in the build automation process, not so much on the CI/CD pipeline scale, but more on the IDE in the build process that are running on the exploit developers. Did I understand that correctly? Is that what they were after?
Yeah. And so it was executing code as part of the pre or post build compile, which is a great
as we know, you
persistence.
you debug that process until it works, and then you're like, good Lord, I can't remember all those commands and all those switches, so I got to put that in a script somewhere to go build this stuff, and that's,
Well, and in Visual Studio, it's even easier now. You've got, you know, it's within inside the settings, and you can have that set for like all your projects to do certain actions.
Yep.
Or some of your projects.
PyCharm's the same way. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
With inside that GUI, like no one's going and looking at that as part of,
because you don't look at it, right? Once it works, like this is, I set it up once, and then I want to think about it again because this is how I build and I want to focus on where is the vulnerability and how do I exploit it. I want to focus on writing the code. I don't want to focus on the build process, and I've been guilty of it too. I set that stuff up and I let it run. For building my containers too. That's another get inside the containers because I'm building containers and deploying them. And once I get that one good build script done, then it's interesting how automation can be the enemy here, right? Automating that workflow. I've automated how I build my container, and then it goes through testing and all that other stuff. So I'm not really thinking about it. I'm writing code. It's building the platform for me to run that code on automatically, and I'm not really looking at that process. I'm looking at my code of the application and what it's going to do, not so much how that container is being built. When it goes and gets tested, it's being tested for functionality. It's really super hard to look for new artifacts that have been added into that build process that maybe have a backdoor in them of some kind. That's hard to look for. As much as we say there's vendors and tooling to look for that, that's really hard to identify.
See, and I think there's going to be a lot more of this. In fact, this was one of the things I was looking at this week, was trying to figure out what those workflows and processes are inside of each of the cloud technologies. Like as you're building like some of the Lambda stacks or the automated stand-up of a virtual machine, or deployment of a Terraform, like where do those Terraforms live? How often are they being audited? Are there logs and controls for those getting manipulated? Like if I was to break in, if I just put some code in a Terraform, every deployment that they use that Terraform for, I then get code execution and a shell back on. Like that seems like a great persistence mechanism and a pretty evil spot to have code injected. Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a lot more logging and a lot more validation of things that do automated tasks that's going to have to happen. There's going to be entire tools, I imagine, or products that actually just function around keeping track of automation and making sure the integrity of the automation is still intact. NAT slipstreaming, anybody?
Oh, this is one I didn't read. I meant to go read this.
Yeah, and when I saw this, I was
I
like,
messed with
wait
this
a
in
minute.
November.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, this wasn't new. I thought we had talked about this already.
This one's different.
Is it?
You did. Now that you say that, Tyler, you did mention something along
It is better too.
Can you distill it down? Because I meant to read this and write it up, and I just missed it because I had too many stories.
Yes. So essentially, they basically are playing upon. They're basically saying that the attackers have seen this in the wild, where attackers are using NAT slipstreaming, which is essentially the ability to, from the outside, jump behind the NAT and gain access to a particular IP address or port via the NAT slipstream. That's kind of the vulnerability. And there's an interesting way they're doing this. This version is utilizing some of the data. I think it's application. What is it? Application level gateway, an ALG. Mm-hmm. So they're able to get behind by leveraging the victim's browser. Basically, the victim visits a website. The victim's browser has application level gateway. From inside the application level gateway, they're able to manipulate some of the packets or the packet headers for TCP and UDP that then allow them to bypass the NAT translation and gain a direct connection via those TCP or UDP headers to the device behind the NAT.
And that's from a browser?
Yes. Just by visiting, no user interaction, just by visiting a website.
Interesting.
And it's basically packet injection.
Like from JavaScript in the browser, I can inject packets? Mm.
Yep. So that's scary. Like, that's really scary because NAT is kind of the thing that we rely on to say that we are not directly connected to the internet, right? And we don't have like that direct exposure. And there's a ton of, like the last one, there was a ton of products, like big name products. I think Cisco, Juniper, the stuff I was looking at was on one of the other big ones. But the big name products, you could get NAT slipstream. You'd have to know an internal IP address and a port, which was kind of a nuance that was really hard to get by. But this one seems to be a little bit different, where they're relying on JavaScript and just either clicking a link or going to a site that sets up that ALG. And once that ALG is there, it becomes very, very interesting.
Yeah, I have to go back and read that.
Aramis was the one that found, or has the demo for the NAT slipstreaming.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Aramis, that Simple Nomad. Well,
Yep.
Simple Nomad works there. Mark Lovelace,
Yeah.
a.k.a. Simple Nomad.
Someone else we have to get back on the show.
Yeah.
And talk to them.
Yeah, you start to think about the stuff that NAT protects, like, IP cameras, Bluetooth devices, ICS, like all of the things that NAT protects right now. Like
Every work from home environment due to COVID.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Like, this seems like a really bad. I don't think this got as much publicity because it's complicated to do. Like, watching the POC and like reading some of the code from the last one, like it was a little bit intricate for what you're trying to do, because you have to understand IP at a very, very low level, and then you have to understand packets and kind of how the new browsers and technologies are interacting with all three of those things.
But wait a minute. I mean, NAT's not a security thing, right? I mean, it was created because of the limitations of IPv4, wasn't it?
So if you have a port sitting behind a firewall that your NAT's protecting, like say you've got a local web server that only you can get to on your LAN side, if this NAT slipstreaming allows you to bypass the NAT, access that IP behind the NAT and the local web server that's operating inside of that local network.
It's like a reverse NAT to get to internal access.
That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is you're saying we rely on NAT for security, but NAT was not designed for security.
That is correct.
Yeah.
It's more of a philosophical, rhetorical statement.
But it sounds like this is a reverse NAT in that.
Well, I think
so it's a firewall, right? Like, you're bypassing so NAT in general, like when they say NAT, like they're leveraging the NAT like the NAT functionality to get behind the firewall. So you're basically bypassing your firewall.
It's a firewall bypass more
It's a
than
firewall
a use of
So,
NAT.
so
Yeah,
if you think about NAT, and that if your cloud service wants to talk to something on the inside of your network, the connection has to initiate from the inside of your network to be able to open that stuff outbound for it to be able to communicate back to you. Mm-hmm. To me, that's sort of what I see NAT slipstreaming doing, is that they're forcing something on the inside of your network, the browser, to create this request outbound on some other thing to some other service to allow that connection back in. Yeah. That's
so it's reverse NAT is kind of how I think of that. Yeah.
That's just my high level understanding of how that sort of works.
That's basically, so you guys remember back in the day when you used to do like the DDWRT, when an APT group was using DDWRT to put memory firewall rules in memory to get from a particular port to an internal port and then route that traffic back on a reverse shell, right?
Right.
Like that was the whole thing. You reboot it, no evidence. Like, our government may have used this a lot.
That was a thing. That was a thing. I remember that back in the day.
What they're doing here. Yeah,
and it was hard. But it was hard to pinpoint because, like you said, if you realize that the person would unplug the router and then all your evidence was gone. I actually did in this response to a case where there were like something weird was going on, exactly what you were describing, and like I pulled apart the router, the firmware, and I'm like, there was no evidence.
Yep.
It was the perfect unatrib hard. It was all the unatrib infrastructure you ever needed.
Speaking of no evidence and like a ghost, what about your story number 2, Paul? The ghost hack.
Oh yeah. So I thought it was interesting that we, as pen testers, I think in social engineering, like to use the employee that's on vacation, right? Because we can, if you're using intelligence gathering methods, you can say, well, that employee's on vacation, right? Because you're like, oh, that's an employee of the company. They're out of office. I visit their social media. They're posting pictures from Cabo, whatever the case may be. And you're like, that employee's on vacation. And we use that to our advantage. But I don't know that you folks have ever used. I certainly have not used this. I'm not saying that you should or should not. I think it's a concern for companies in protecting the security of their enterprises. But the attackers went after employees that had deceased because they realized that the processes for removing accounts from those that are deceased are different from those employees that have left. If you have an employee that left, and the article spends a lot of time talking about, when employees leave and they're disgruntled or they're fired and then disgruntled, you have a heightened stage of awareness because we've worked in IT in places, all of us collectively, I believe. When an employee leaves and they're disgruntled, the security person is the first person they go to be like, so we just fired Bill. And Bill was kind of pissed off at us.
Or more importantly, Bill is in the office in HR getting fired right now.
And we need to make sure all his access is removed because we have even if they had a feeling that person might be disgruntled, you had to wipe out their access, right? But if Bill were to, no one lives forever. If Bill were to, we always use the analogy, get hit by a bus, right? But someone dies, you don't necessarily go in and remove all their access because they can't leverage that access themselves. However, attackers did in this scenario because, and we've all seen this too, you use your own credentials to run processes rather than a service account. So you can't just go remove that person's access. And that's what they took advantage of.
Yep. See, I'm curious if they purposefully did this, where they seen an obituary, they knew where they worked.
It's true.
And then they went and tested things.
Oh, I thought you meant on purpose, like they assassinated Bill and then used Bill's access. That would be awful. That would be something the Russians would do. I mean, not to stereotype, but like I wouldn't put that past nation state.
That depends on if it was poison or you fell out of a window.
If it was poison, I would say Russians. Window would be more China, I think.
Yeah.
But attribution's hard. Like, would the Russians just push someone out of a window to make it?
Or would China poison someone to make it think it was Russia?
Or would they insert the gas through the window?
I associate China with pushing people out windows because I like to think that my technology from China comes from factories that have nets. Did you guys know this?
What?
Yes.
The factories in China, the working conditions are so poor that people jump out of the windows. In a lot of factories, they installed nets. So they land in the net, and then I don't know if they put them back to work or not. I'm just speculating, but they put them back to work.
It's a liability.
So
They
I
don't
want
people
my
docking and
technology.
takes away from
It's a-
protecting
it's
it.
a
My wife can't even
management
have this
track.
conversation. I tried to have this conversation with my wife. I'm like, you know the iPhone you're using? I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's one with nets. She's like, what are you talking about? And I described the scenario, and she's like, I don't know if I want an iPhone anymore. I'm like, no, I'm right there with you. Like, it's a terrible crime against humanity.
But more importantly, they jump out the window and they land in the net. They actually have to crawl at the edge of the net now to jump off. So,
Right.
like, you really have to be committed.
Well, I don't know what.
Did I just take that too
level-
far?
I don't know what level the nets are, and I'm
don't know.
told they put them
I
back to
think-
work after they land on the nets, which I
I don't think we can recover from that, so I think we should close. Personally,
it's a whole other segment for another show
Yeah.
where our technology comes from and what the working conditions are.
Yep.
For sure. There was articles about SonicWall.
You know, instead
Just
of nets, they should just use bubble wrap.
They could use bubble wrap. In China for stunts, they would use in Chinese kung fu
they
movies. They'd
should
use
issue
boxes,
bubble wrap
Yep.
uniforms.
empty cardboard boxes is what they would fall in. But just a quick note on SonicWall. There was speculation that it was a 0-day in SonicWall's products that led to a breach of SonicWall's infrastructure, which I'm not sure. Then there was the story when I grabbed the headline. It was former LulzSec hacker releases VPN 0-day used to hack hacking team from 2015. That was not a 0-day. SonicWall had patched that issue, and this person had released the exploit for that patched issue, which means it's not a 0-day. So don't believe all the headlines you read. And again, if you look at our show notes, it actually does say the original headline. When you go to the article, they have since corrected that headline. But what's interesting, when it ends up in the RSS feeds, you capture the original headline. And I've caught some people that have changed some headlines for various reasons because it ends up in RSS. There was an off-color headline that I had caught, and they had updated it, but I still had the original headline. And I'm like, how did you get away with that headline? Like, that was really... We talk about appropriate versus inappropriate. Like, this was an inappropriate headline. And they changed it. And I was like, well, I still captured your original one. And I'm like, I still think poorly of you for allowing one of your authors to have that headline. In this case, they did correct it, but it was not a 0-day. Yep. In any case, SonicWall was in the news.
Yep. The other one that I loved, the Stack Overflow 2019 hack was guided by advice from Stack Overflow.
Well,
Like-
I think that people think that like hackers were complete experts in everything.
Oh, no.
That's not our skill. Our skill is
We can Google better than you.
we can Google and learn these new technologies enough to hack them to accomplish our goals. And so the person that hacked Stack Overflow used Stack Overflow. This was the JetBrains one.
Yeah.
To learn about the JetBrains CI/CD software enough
And
to be able to
TeamCity.
escalate. What is it called?
TeamCity. Yep.
To learn TeamCity enough to do that, but they could track this person's access to see what articles they were reading on Stack Overflow, which were, how do I use TeamCity again
Yeah.
to be able to accomplish my goals? And
Yep.
again, it comes back to,
We're not-
and we don't know
we're not
everything about
smarter.
everything. We just know how to learn
Yeah.
up really fast.
I
Right?
also
We
program
have
on Stack
imagination and curiosity.
Yes,
You know,
agreed.
What happens if you do that?
Yep.
You said to do it this way, but
I have an
wanna
account
do it
on
this-
Overflow. Like, how do I use that? I gotta go.
Overflow. Yeah, I got to go
Stack
figure that
Overflow
out.
and figure it out.
Yep. Yeah. See, I also program on Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
In any case, well, thank you everyone for listening and watching to this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.